She thought she was walking into a prison. She had no idea the monster had already spent 2 years quietly falling in love with her. 3 men in tailored suits sat in her mother's living room at midnight. The debt was $500,000. The payment wasn't money. It was her. A forced marriage to the most dangerous man on the East Coast, Roman Valenti. The man they called untouchable. The man who had never once lost. Willow Hart had 2 choices. Say yes and sacrifice her freedom, or say no and watch her little brother disappear before morning. Drop a like. Leave your city in the comments. Let me see how far this story travels. The rain had been falling since 6 in the evening, and by the time Willow Hart pushed through the front door of her mother's apartment building, her uniform was soaked through to the skin. She could feel the damp fabric clinging to the backs of her thighs, the waterlogged sneakers squeaking against the cracked tile floor of the lobby. Her feet ached the way they always did after a double shift. A deep, grinding complaint that started at the heel and radiated upward through both knees like a slow current of punishment. She had worked 11 hours. She had smiled through all of them. The elevator was broken again. It had been broken for 3 weeks, which meant 4 flights of stairs with a bag of groceries cutting into her left palm and the smell of industrial cleaner still embedded in her hair from wiping down the lunch counter after the last customer left. The stairwell light on the 3rd floor had been flickering since February. Nobody had fixed it. Willow had stopped expecting them to. She wasn't thinking about anything dangerous when she reached the 4th floor landing. She was thinking about whether her mother had remembered to take her blood pressure medication and whether there was enough rice left in the cabinet for 2 people and whether Rowan had actually done his homework or just claimed to. Ordinary things. The small, exhausting machinery of a life that ran on worry and caffeine. She stopped with her hand on the door handle. The hallway was wrong. Not visually wrong. The familiar water stain above apartment 4C was still there. The torn corner of the hallway carpet still curled up like a dead leaf. But something in the air was different, heavier. There was a smell she couldn't immediately name. Expensive. That was the word her brain landed on first. Expensive. Like leather and cold cologne and something faintly chemical, the kind of scent that came with wealth too absolute to be casual. Willow pushed the door open. The apartment was lit. Her mother sat on the edge of the couch with both hands pressed between her knees, a posture Willow had never seen from her before, small and contracted, like a woman trying to make herself invisible without leaving the room. Diane Hart was 61 years old and had survived her husband's death, 2 rounds of chemotherapy, and a decade of financial ruin with a particular brand of stubborn dignity. Willow had never once seen her mother look like this, like she was afraid. 3 men occupied the apartment with the ease of people who had already decided they owned it. 2 stood flanking the entrance to the kitchen, both large, both carrying the particular stillness of men who had learned not to waste movement. The 3rd sat in the armchair across from her mother, the good armchair, the one they kept meaning to reupholster, with his ankle crossed over his knee and his hands laced together in his lap. He was the one who looked up when Willow walked in. She noticed immediately that he was not what she expected. She didn't know what she had expected. She hadn't had time to form an expectation, but she would have imagined someone like him would be louder, would project danger the way a storm projects danger, with sound and visible force. Instead, the man in the armchair was simply still, dark hair, cut cleanly. A charcoal suit that fit the way expensive things fit, precisely and without apology. His face was angular and composed, and the only remarkable feature, the one that stayed with Willow even when she would later try to forget everything about this night, were his eyes. They were a pale, cold gray, the color of ice over deep water, and they assessed her with the calm efficiency of someone reviewing a document they had already read. "You must be Willow," he said. His voice was low and even. No warmth in it. No particular hostility either, just a statement delivered as fact. "Who are you?" She didn't say it as a question. She didn't move from the doorway. "Roman Valenti." The name hit her the way names like that hit people, not through recognition of the man himself, but through the accumulated weight of everything she had ever heard attached to those 2 words. Blackwater's newspapers avoided him. The 2 politicians who had publicly investigated him had both quietly reversed course within 6 months. Her coworker Terry, whose ex-boyfriend had worked dock security along the waterfront, had once described Roman Valenti the way people describe natural disasters. Not evil, not good, simply inevitable. Simply there. A feature of the landscape that crushed what it chose to crush and left everything else alone. The groceries were still in her left hand. The bag had cut a red line into her palm. "Mom," she kept her voice flat. "Are you okay?" Diane Hart looked up, and what Willow saw in her mother's face was worse than fear. It was resignation, the look of a woman who had already run through every possible exit and found them sealed. "Sit down, baby," Diane said. "I'll stand." Roman Valenti did not look annoyed. He unfolded his hands and rested them on the arms of the chair and said, "Your mother owes a significant debt to a business associate of mine. The original loan was made 14 months ago. The principal was $80,000. He paused for exactly the length of time it took that number to register. With accumulated interest and penalties, the current amount is $493,000. Willow set the groceries down on the floor beside the door. Her hands were steadier than she expected them to be. "My mother doesn't have that kind of money." "No," he agreed. "She does not." "Then you're here to do what, exactly?" "To offer an alternative." "I don't want to hear it." "Willow." Her mother's voice cracked on the second syllable. "Please." She looked at her mother's hands, still pressed between her knees, the knuckles white. Diane had borrowed money. Of course she had. The medical bills from the second round of chemo had never been fully settled. Rowan's tuition payments were behind. Willow had known things were bad. She hadn't known they had gotten this bad. She hadn't known because her mother had protected her from it the same way Willow had spent her entire adult life trying to protect her mother and her brother. Badly, imperfectly, and with a blind faith that the situation would somehow improve on its own. She turned back to Roman Valenti. "What's the alternative?" "Marriage," he said. She waited for the rest of the sentence. When none came, she said, "You're serious?" "I don't make jokes about contracts." "You're calling it a contract." "It is a contract." "It's insane," Willow said. "You don't know me. I don't know you. She almost said nobody. She stopped herself. "I'm a waitress. I work at a diner on Clement Street. I don't own anything. I don't have connections or family money or whatever it is you'd actually want from something like this." Roman Valenti looked at her steadily. "I know." "Then why?" He didn't answer immediately. He studied her face for a moment with those pale gray eyes. Not hungrily, not the way men sometimes looked at her when the diner was slow and they thought she wasn't paying attention, but with the particular focus of someone solving a problem. It made her feel cataloged, filed. "The terms are simple," he said. "The debt is cleared entirely upon marriage. Your mother keeps this apartment. Your brother keeps his scholarship enrollment. No money changes hands. No further contact is made with your family by anyone in my organization or affiliated with it. And in return, you become my wife." "For how long?" "Permanently." The word landed in the center of the room like something dropped from a height. Willow heard her mother pull in a breath. The two men by the kitchen hadn't moved. The rain was still audible through the window, steady and indifferent. "No," Willow said. "Willow." "Mom." "No." She looked back at Roman Valenti. "I'm not interested in whatever this is. If you need to collect a debt, collect it through legal channels. Sue us, take the apartment. I'll work 3 jobs if I have to, but I'm not marrying a stranger to settle someone else's." "Rowan is 20 years old," Roman said. She stopped. "He works Tuesday and Thursday evenings at the loading dock on Fletcher Wharf. He takes the 38 bus home and gets off at the Brennan Street stop. He usually stops at the corner store for a drink before he walks the last 4 blocks. Roman's voice remained completely level throughout. No threat in the tone, no emphasis, simply facts delivered like directions. "He's a good student, pre-law. He wants to work in public defense. He has a girlfriend named Maya who is studying nursing. He is entirely unaware that his mother borrowed money from people who operate outside legal channels." The air in the room had changed quality. "If you're threatening my brother," Willow said, "I'm not threatening anything." Roman tilted his head slightly, almost the way a man tilts his head when he's listening to music that interests him. "I'm explaining the landscape. The debt exists. The people to whom it is owed operate according to their own system of collection. I have offered to absorb the debt entirely and ensure that nothing happens to your family. The alternative is that I step away and allow the debt to run its natural course. Which means that by this time next week, your brother will know his mother borrowed $500,000 from dangerous people, and the methods of repayment will no longer involve paperwork. Willow looked at her mother. Diane's eyes were wet. She hadn't been crying. Diane Hart rarely cried, but the moisture had gathered there, the way emotion gathered in people who refused to let it out. She was sitting in her own living room, in her good armchair taken over by a stranger, looking at her daughter with the particular devastation of a parent who has failed to shield their child from their own mistake. "How long have you known him?" Willow asked. Diane said nothing. "Mom, how long?" "The broker is someone I met through the clinic," Diane said. Her voice was very quiet. "After the second round, the bills were—" She stopped, pressed her lips together. "I should have told you. I know I should have. I thought I could manage it." "You thought you could manage $500,000. It wasn't that much at first." Willow turned away from her mother, turned back to the window. The city outside was wet and blurred, the streetlights smearing orange across the wet pavement. She thought about Rowan at the loading dock on Fletcher Wharf, hauling freight in the dark, entirely unaware. Rowan, who had worked too hard for the scholarship to lose it. Rowan, who still laughed at terrible jokes and called her every Sunday and had their father's jaw and their mother's stubbornness, and had never done a single thing to deserve being handed somebody else's disaster. She turned back. "I want a lawyer to review whatever document you're calling a contract," she said. "I want it reviewed before I sign anything." Roman Valenti's expression didn't shift. "Reasonable. I want my mother's name taken off the debt in writing before the wedding. Also reasonable. And I want—" She stopped. Her voice had done something it wasn't supposed to do, thinned slightly at the edges. She pulled it back. "I want your word that Rowan stays out of this entirely. He doesn't find out. He doesn't get involved. Whatever this arrangement is, he's not part of it. You have it. Your word means something?" For the first time, something moved in Roman Valenti's expression, not quite a smile, something smaller and more contained. "In the world I operate in," he said, "my word is the only currency that functions reliably." She stared at him for a long moment, tried to find something in his face that would give her an angle, a tell, an inconsistency, something she could use. There was nothing. He was either the most honest, dangerous man she had ever encountered, or he was so practiced at deception that the performance was indistinguishable from sincerity. She had no way of knowing which, and no time to find out. "When?" she said. "Tomorrow morning." The clock on the wall read 12:17 a.m. I understand it's fast," Roman said. "My reasons are operational, not personal. A longer engagement creates exposure." Willow looked at the groceries she had set down by the door. Eggs, rice, a carton of orange juice, a bag of apples. 11 hours on her feet for that. She thought about her locker at the diner, the photograph of Rowan at his high school graduation that she had taped to the inside of the door, because the diner was where she spent most of her waking hours, and she needed something in that place that mattered to her. "I'm going to need the rest of tonight," she said, "to pack, and to tell my mother what she needs to know." She looked at Diane and felt something hard and careful settle into place in her chest. Alone, Roman Valenti stood. He was taller than she had registered from across the room, several inches over 6 feet, with the particular physical economy of a man who never moved without purpose. He straightened his jacket and looked at her with those pale, cold eyes, and for a moment she had the dizzying and irrational sensation that he was seeing something in her that she couldn't see in herself. "A car will be here at 9, he said. "Don't be late." He moved toward the door. One of the flanking men stepped ahead to open it. In the hallway, Roman Valenti paused and looked back at her. "I'll be honest with you about one thing tonight, Miss Hart," he said. "What?" "You're going to be safe. Whatever else you believe about this situation, you're going to be safe." Then he was gone, and the door closed behind him, and the apartment was suddenly very quiet except for the rain and the sound of Diane Hart beginning, finally, to cry. Willow did not go to her mother immediately. She stood in the center of the living room for 3 full minutes, counting them, aware that she was counting them, aware that she needed the specific number of seconds to do something functional with her hands and her breathing before she could be useful to anyone. Then she sat down beside her mother on the couch and took her hands and did not say anything for a while. "He's going to be okay," Diane said, meaning Rowan. I tried to make sure. I know, Mom. You shouldn't have to. I know." Willow held her mother's hands, both of them cold and trembling faintly. "Tell me everything, from the beginning. I need to understand what actually happened." It took 2 hours. The original loan had been $35,000, taken out 14 months ago through a broker Diane had met at the oncology clinic. A man named Ferris, who presented himself as a private lender offering compassionate rates to patients in financial difficulty. The rate had not been compassionate. The first payment had been manageable, the second less so. By the fourth month, the interest had already doubled the principal, and by the time Diane had understood the nature of what she had walked into, the debt had accumulated a momentum that felt geological, slow, enormous, and impossible to redirect. She had told no one. Not Willow, not Rowan. She had sold jewelry. She had taken every extra hour the clinic offered for volunteer coordination. She had borrowed from her sister in Portland until her sister stopped answering the phone, and she had smiled across the dinner table at her daughter and her son and said nothing because Diane Hart had spent 30 years protecting her children from the worst parts of reality, and she had not known how to stop. By midnight, Willow had a full picture. By 1 in the morning, she had made her calculations. By 2, she had accepted what the calculations meant. She packed a single bag. She didn't know what to put in it. What did you pack for a life that hadn't existed an hour ago? So she defaulted to practical. 3 changes of clothes. The photograph from her locker at the diner that she kept in her wallet instead, her phone charger, the small notebook where she wrote grocery lists and budgets, and the occasional thought she didn't trust to disappear. She sat on the edge of her narrow bed and looked around the room she had lived in since she was 22 years old, the water stain in the upper right corner of the ceiling shaped like a running dog, the bookshelf assembled from milk crates, the window that faced the brick wall of the neighboring building, and felt the particular weightlessness of a decision that has removed all other options. She did not sleep. At 8:45, she kissed her mother's forehead and walked downstairs with her bag and stood on the wet sidewalk outside the apartment building in the thin, gray morning light. And at precisely 9 o'clock, a black SUV with tinted windows rolled to a stop at the curb. The driver did not introduce himself. He opened the rear door and stood aside, and Willow climbed in, and the door closed behind her, and the city slid past the tinted windows as they drove north. The ceremony was in the library of a building she didn't recognize, a room that smelled of old money and old wood, with floor-to-ceiling shelves and a desk large enough to seat 8 people. A judge presided. 2 witnesses she didn't know signed the document. Roman Valenti stood beside her in a dark suit and said the required words in the required order with the particular tone of a man executing a transaction, and she said them too, and when the judge pronounced them married, the room felt exactly as quiet and airless as she had expected it to feel. Roman did not attempt to kiss her. He offered his hand, she shook it, which was a strange and absurd thing to do with your husband. And then they walked out of the library into a corridor where 3 men were waiting, and someone handed Roman a phone and he glanced at it and said something quietly to the man closest to him in a language she didn't catch. And they walked toward an exit with the brisk purposefulness of people in a business they could not pause for sentiment. Nobody told her anything. She was placed in the rear seat of an SUV, a different one from the morning, larger, and driven north through the city and then out of it, into the residential belt above the water where the houses grew longer and the distances between them grew wider. They drove for 40 minutes. The road narrowed. Trees replaced buildings. Then a gate appeared at the end of a private lane. Black iron, automatic, flanked by stone pillars. And beyond it, at the end of a gravel drive lined with maples, she saw the house. She had expected something ostentatious, a display of power made architectural, turrets, fountains, something that announced itself. Instead, the estate was restrained. Massive, yes. 3 stories of dark stone and glass, wide wings extending from a central structure, but it sat within its grounds with the self-assurance of something that did not need to prove itself. It looked old. It looked permanent. It looked like the kind of place that had endured several owners and several eras and intended to outlast all of them. A woman named Celeste met her at the front door. She was perhaps 50, with gray-streaked hair pulled back efficiently and the kind of steady composure that spoke of long service in a complex environment. She did not make a ceremony of the introduction. "Mrs. Valenti," she said, "I'll show you the house." Willow had been called many things. Nobody had ever called her that before. The tour took 30 minutes. She was shown the layout of the main floor. Library, formal dining room. A kitchen that was larger than most restaurant kitchens she had seen. A sitting room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a garden that was still gray and bare in the March cold. Upstairs, 5 bedrooms, each with its own bathroom. Her rooms, she was given 2, a bedroom and a sitting room adjacent to it, were in the east wing, above the garden, with windows on 2 sides and a view of the stone wall at the property's perimeter and the trees beyond it. Her rooms, not their rooms. She registered this without comment. "Mr. Valenti's suite is in the north wing," Celeste said, in the tone of someone who has anticipated the question. "The household staff is present 6 days a week. You'll meet them at dinner. The grounds are yours to walk during daylight hours. The gate? You will need an access code, which I'll give you this evening, requires authorization after 8 p.m. A pause, precise and deliberate. "For security reasons." "Security from what?" Celeste's expression didn't change. "Mr. Valenti will be available to speak with you this evening if you have questions." That was the extent of the answer. The first day was disorienting in the particular way of total displacement. Not traumatic, but amputated somehow. The familiar rhythms of her life gone without replacement. No early shift, no uniform, no lunch orders scrawled on a paper ticket, no Rowan calling to complain about his professor, no Diane at the kitchen table with her crossword puzzle and her morning tea. Instead, there was a large, silent house with heavy drapes and expensive rugs, and the occasional sound of footsteps in corridors she hadn't yet learned to navigate. She ate lunch alone in the kitchen because she didn't know where else to eat. And a woman named Petra, who managed the cooking, set a plate in front of her without ceremony and refilled her water glass without being asked and said nothing personal. Willow sat with her back to the window and ate and watched the gray garden and told herself that the absence of threat was a kind of safety, even if it didn't feel like it. Roman appeared at 6:30. He came to the sitting room adjacent to her bedroom, knocked, which surprised her. And when she opened the door, he was still in work clothes, the jacket traded for a gray sweater, which humanized him slightly and unwillingly. "You should eat dinner," he said, "with me, if that's acceptable." She had eaten lunch 4 hours ago and had been too unsettled to be hungry since, but she said, "Fine." They ate in the dining room. The table was set for 2 at one end, which was still a significant amount of formal mahogany between them. Petra brought food and left. No staff hovered. The room was quiet except for the sound of silverware and the wind outside, and the intermittent tick of a clock somewhere. Roman ate methodically and said nothing for the first 10 minutes. Willow matched his silence because she had no script for this and refused to fill the space with nervous talk. She watched him the way she watched difficult customers at the diner, not openly, but at an angle, gauging. "Is the room adequate?" he asked finally. "It's fine. If there's anything you need, I'll ask Celeste." "Good." He cut something on his plate. "You should know the household schedule. Celeste can explain the details. The staff are..." A slight pause. "They're loyal to this house. They've been here a long time. They're not informants and they're not your keepers. But they watch. It's their nature. You'll adjust to it." "Are you telling me I can trust them?" "I'm telling you they're not your enemies." "That's not the same thing." He looked at her directly for the first time since sitting down. Something moved behind his eyes. Not irritation, not quite. Recognition, maybe. "No," he said, "it's not." She put her fork down. "I need to understand the rules. I need to know what I'm allowed to do, where I can go, whether I can go anywhere." "You can go most places." "Most. There are certain areas of the city where your presence would create risk," he said. "I'll have a car available for you whenever you want it. My people will be visible when you're outside the property. That's not optional." "Surveillance. Protection. From what?" He considered the question for a moment, and she got the impression he was deciding not how to answer, but how much to answer. "I have enemies," he said finally. "Most of them are manageable. Some are not. My wife being visible and unprotected is not a risk I'm willing to carry." Your wife, she repeated. Yes. That word is strange. It'll get less strange. You don't know that. No, he agreed, but most things do. She picked up her fork again. They finished dinner in silence, but it was a different quality of silence than before. Less charged, less performative, almost ordinary. After dinner, she walked to the sitting room window and looked out at the dark garden. The floodlights had come on at dusk, illuminating the stone paths and the bare maple trees and the wall at the property's perimeter. Beyond the wall, she could see the tips of other trees, and beyond that, very faintly, the glow of the city. She was 17 miles from Clement Street. She was 17 miles from the diner and her locker and the photograph that was now in her bag in the bedroom of a house she didn't know. And she had $11 in her wallet and a married name she hadn't chosen, and a husband who knocked before entering rooms and spoke to her like she was a party to a negotiation rather than the settlement of one. And she didn't know whether any of this was bearable yet. She didn't know if bearable was the right word. She suspected the right words hadn't been invented for this specific kind of situation. She pressed her palm flat against the cold glass of the window. The city glowed beyond the wall. She had made her choice to protect the people she loved. What she hadn't yet figured out was how to protect herself. The weeks that followed had a strange, suspended quality. Days that were neither hostile nor comfortable. A life assembled from silences and small negotiations. Roman left the estate early each morning, always before she was awake, and returned in the evenings at varying hours. Sometimes he ate dinner with her. More often he ate late and alone in his office. And she knew this not because she was watching for it, but because the sound of the house shifted after a certain hour, and she had become, out of necessity, attuned to its rhythms. He never entered her rooms without knocking. He never demanded her time, her attention, her company. He did not treat her like a possession, and this confused her in ways she hadn't expected, because she had prepared herself for that. She had built her defenses against a specific kind of man, the kind who purchased people and expected compliance. And Roman Valenti did not behave like that man at all. He behaved like someone who had made a decision and intended to honor it without requiring acknowledgement. She called Rowan on the third morning from her cell phone, sitting on the window seat with her knees pulled up. She had a script prepared. Careful, ordinary, nothing alarming. "Hey," Rowan said. "Mom says you moved." "Temporarily," she said. "Staying with a friend. Taking a break from the commute." "A friend where?" Mom was weirdly vague. "North of the city. It's nice, quiet." Pause. Rowan processing. "You okay?" "I'm fine." "Because you sound—" "I'm fine, Rowan. How's the Brennan paper going?" He let her redirect him, the way younger siblings learn to let older ones redirect, because the alternative is a conversation nobody is prepared to have. He talked about the paper, and about Maya, and about a professor who graded on a curve so aggressive it bordered on fiction, and Willow listened and said the right things, and when she hung up, she sat very still for a while with the phone in her lap and the cold window at her back. She was doing this for him. That was the center of it. That was the thing she returned to on the morning she woke at 4 a.m. and lay in the dark trying to locate the ground beneath her. She was doing this for him. On the 11th day, she went to the kitchen earlier than usual and found the house staff beginning their morning routine. And she sat at the kitchen counter with a coffee and watched. And after a while, Petra set a plate in front of her without comment, and she ate. And the cook, whose name turned out to be Denny, said something dry and funny about the delivery company that kept leaving packages at the wrong gate. And Willow laughed before she thought to stop herself, and the kitchen felt, briefly, like somewhere a person could exist. On the 14th day, she overheard them. She had gone to the library to find something to read. The room was stacked with books, floor to ceiling, organized without apparent pattern, and had not announced herself when she arrived because she hadn't yet fully internalized that arriving anywhere in this house required announcement. Two men were in the adjacent corridor, their voices carrying through the partially open door. "Can't figure out what he's doing with her." "Don't." "I'm serious. Look at her. She worked a diner. She's—" The voice dropped half a register. "Not enough. She's nobody. She's not—" "Drop it." "I'm just saying what everyone's thinking. She doesn't fit. She doesn't look right standing next to him. He could have anyone in the city and he picks some—" The second voice cut across hard. "You want to finish that sentence and explain it to him yourself?" Silence. "Thought so," said the second voice. Footsteps moving away. Willow stood in the library with a book she had already stopped seeing in her hands. The room felt very still. The words had been said quietly, almost carelessly. The kind of careless that meant they weren't a performance, weren't intended as a message. Just honest. Just what people thought when they thought nobody was listening. She had heard versions of these words her entire life. Not always spoken, often only implied. In the way a customer at the diner looked through her rather than at her. In the way a room shifted when she walked into it wrong. In the way she had learned to take up less space in situations where space felt like something she hadn't paid for. She knew the feeling. She had thought she had armored herself against it adequately. She had been wrong about that. She set the book down and walked back to her rooms and sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the wall and thought about Roman Valenti's pale gray eyes and the absolute stillness of him and the fact that he had spent 14 days in the same house as her without ever once looking at her the way those men in the corridor had assumed he must, with condescension, with confusion, with the particular pity of people who believe they understand value better than the people they're observing. She had no explanation for him. She was not sure the explanation was hers to seek, but the words from the corridor stayed with her, settled into the back of her throat like something she hadn't finished swallowing. The fat waitress, the weak link, the wife nobody understood. She sat with those words until they stopped burning, and then she stood up and went to the bathroom and ran cold water over her face and looked at herself in the mirror for a long time. Not critically, not with the assessing cruelty she sometimes turned on herself in bad moments, but simply looked. The way you look at a stranger you're trying to understand. She had made the hardest choice of her life in under 30 seconds in a flooded living room at midnight. She had walked into this with nothing, into a situation she hadn't chosen with people she didn't know. And she had not collapsed. She had not begged. She had negotiated. She had set terms. The wife nobody understood. Maybe that was fine. Maybe she didn't need to be understood by people who spoke in corridors. She dried her face. She went back to the library and chose a different book. 17 days into her new life, Roman did not come home. She didn't notice until 10 p.m., which she noted with some discomfort, the fact that she had established a rhythm of his presence without meaning to. By midnight, she became aware of a shift in the household staff, a tightening of something she couldn't name. Celeste moved through the corridors twice without stopping. One of the security men, who usually stayed outside, was standing in the main hallway near the staircase instead. "Is something wrong?" Willow said. "No, ma'am," the man said. "Where is he?" A pause that lasted one beat too long. "Mr. Valenti is managing a situation. He'll be back before morning." She went to bed at 1 a.m. and lay in the dark and told herself she didn't care. She told herself that this marriage was a transaction, that Roman Valenti's whereabouts were his business, that the arrangement between them was simple and contractual and required nothing emotional from her, and certainly not the particular quiet anxiety that was currently making it impossible to sleep. She told herself this until approximately 2 in the morning, and then she heard the front door and footsteps in the main hallway and low voices, and then silence. She did not go to check. She lay in the dark and listened to the house settle. He was back. The thought arrived before she could stop it, and the relief that came with it was small and unwanted and entirely inconvenient, and she pressed the heel of her hand against her sternum as if that would help. On the 18th day, she found Roman in the garden. She hadn't known he used the garden. She had assumed it was decorative, staff-maintained, visually present, not particularly inhabited. But she came around the side of the house at mid-morning and found him at the far end of the stone path, standing with both hands in his jacket pockets, looking at nothing in particular. He turned when he heard her footsteps on the gravel. He looked tired. Not the bone-deep exhaustion she knew from double shifts, but something older and more settled, the weariness of someone who had been managing impossible things for long enough that the impossibility no longer surprised him. "I didn't know you came out here," she said. "Most mornings," he said. "When the schedule allows." She stopped a few feet from him. The garden was beginning to shift from late winter into something that might eventually become spring. Small green evidence at the base of the maple trees, the first suggestions of something alive. "Last night," she said. He looked at her, waited. "Celeste said you were managing a situation." "Yes." "That's not an answer." "No," he said. "It's not." He looked back at the garden. "There are people who have been invested in my failure for a long time. Last night, one of them made a move. It's been addressed." Are you okay? The question came out before she had a chance to weigh whether she wanted to ask it. Roman turned and looked at her with an expression she couldn't categorize. Not surprised exactly, but something adjacent to it. Yes, he said. I'm okay. The morning was cold and quiet around them. She should have gone back inside. She had no particular reason to be standing in a cold garden with a man she had been married to for 18 days. She didn't go back inside. Why me? She said. He was quiet for long enough that she thought he wasn't going to answer. There are things I can explain to you eventually, he said, and things I can't explain yet. Not because I'm hiding them, because some of them require... He paused. Context. Context. Time, he said, and trust. We don't have trust. Not yet. She looked at him, at the lines of his face, the steadiness of him, the quality of stillness he carried everywhere he went. She thought about the men in the corridor. She thought about her mother's trembling hands. She thought about Rowan at the loading dock on Fletcher Wharf, entirely unaware, living his life in the gap that her sacrifice had made possible. When this started, she said, you told me I was going to be safe. Yes. I'm starting to understand that safe is more complicated than I thought. Roman looked at her for a moment. Something in his expression had shifted incrementally, not softened exactly, but opened slightly, the way a door opens when the latch releases before the handle is turned. You're the most practical person I've encountered in years, he said. Not warmly, not as a compliment in the usual sense, as an observation. Is that good? In my world, he said. It's necessary. She should have felt insulted. She was not sure why she didn't. They walked back to the house separately, 3 feet of cold air between them, and she thought about trust and time and context. And she thought about the faint green beginning at the base of the maple trees. And she told herself the feeling she was trying not to name was simply the confusion of radical displacement, and not anything more complicated than that. She was still telling herself that 3 days later, when Celeste came to her rooms at 6 in the morning with an expression that had evacuated all its usual composure, and Willow looked at the woman's face and felt the ground shift beneath her feet before a single word was spoken. There's been an incident, Celeste said. What kind of incident? The outer perimeter wall, the east section. Celeste's voice was carefully even in the way of someone who is maintaining control through effort. Someone fired on the property 20 minutes ago. Mr. Valenti is outside with the security team. He asked me to... She stopped. He asked me to make sure you stayed inside. Willow was already pulling on her shoes. The window above her bed faced east. She looked out through the glass at the pre-dawn gray, and somewhere in the tree line beyond the wall she could hear, very faintly and unmistakably, the sound of men moving. The war she hadn't known she was standing inside had just announced itself. And for the first time since she had walked through the door of her mother's apartment to find 3 men in tailored suits, she understood with complete clarity that safe was no longer a simple word. It was a promise being tested. And someone out there was trying very hard to break it. The sound stopped before she could locate it. Willow stood at the east window with both palms flat against the glass and stared at the tree line beyond the perimeter wall, and heard nothing. And then, between one breath and the next, heard everything. Voices through the pre-dawn dark, low and directional. The crunch of boots on gravel. A radio transmitting something clipped and unintelligible. Somewhere south of the wall, a light swept through the trees in a short, deliberate arc, and then cut off. Celeste was still standing in the doorway. I need to know what happened, Willow said. She didn't turn from the window. Mrs. Valenti, someone shot at this house. I need to know what happened. Mr. Valenti is handling... I'm not asking about Mr. Valenti. She turned then. Celeste's face was composed, but the composure was working hard, the way a door works hard against pressure from the other side. I'm asking you, what happened? How many shots? Was anyone hurt? A beat. Then Celeste made a decision. Willow could see it, the small internal shift. 3 shots. Rifle, east wall, upper section. No one was hurt. The shooter was outside the perimeter. Another pause. It appears to have been a message. A message. Rather than an attempt. Willow turned back to the window. A message. Someone with a rifle and enough information about the property's layout to target the east wall. the section closest to her rooms, had stood in the tree line before sunrise and fired 3 shots and then withdrawn. Not to kill, to announce. She thought about the coffee she drank every morning at the small table by the east window. She thought about the chair she sat in. She thought about the exact angle of light at that hour, how visible a person would be from outside, backlit against the interior lamp. She stepped back from the glass. "I want to speak with Roman," she said. "Now. Not when it's convenient. Now." Celeste left without argument. Willow dressed in this time it took for him to come upstairs. Jeans, a heavy sweater, socks, grounding herself in the physical sequence because the alternative was to stand in the center of the room and let the full weight of what had just happened land on her without preparation. 3 shots, east wall. The window she sat beside every morning. Roman came through the door 4 minutes later. He was in his outdoor clothes, dark jacket, work boots still carrying traces of damp from the grounds. His hair was pushed back from his face, and there was a tension in his jaw that she hadn't seen before, something contained and deliberate, the look of a man holding something in with both hands. He looked at her across the room. "You're okay," he said. It wasn't a question. "I want the truth," she said. "All of it, right now." "Willow, don't." Her voice was steady. She was surprised by how steady it was. "You told me I was going to be safe. You told me that the first night. You said it like it was a fact, like it was a thing you could deliver. And I believed you, which was—" She stopped, pressed her back teeth together. "I believed you, and now someone with a rifle was standing outside my window before sunrise. So I want the truth. What is this? What am I actually standing in the middle of?" Roman was quiet for 3 full seconds. Then he moved to the chair near the window. Not the window itself, she noticed. He positioned himself away from it instinctively. And sat down and put both elbows on his knees and looked at the floor for a moment. "His name is Maxim Dragunov," he said. She sat on the edge of the bed. The mattress dipped slightly beneath her. "He operated the Northern Distribution Network for 6 years before I shut it down. 2 years ago. He lost significant infrastructure, significant revenue. He's been rebuilding elsewhere, but the damage was permanent enough that he's been looking for a lever, something he could use to destabilize me rather than fight me directly." Roman's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "He found one. Me." The word landed in the room. "He became aware of you before the marriage," Roman said. "I don't know exactly when. I know that he's been watching the estate since the wedding. The shots this morning were—" He exhaled. "Were him confirming a theory that you matter enough to be a target. Do I?" The question came out quieter than she intended. Roman looked up from the floor and met her eyes, and the thing she saw on his face in that moment was not the controlled blankness she had come to expect from him. It was something less managed, something that sat closer to the surface. "Yes," he said. The word was so simple and so unqualified that it sat in the room between them like something physical. "You should have told me before now," she said. "Yes." "Why didn't you?" "Because I was trying to manage it before it reached you. I thought I had more time." He looked at the east window. "I was wrong about that." She wanted to be angry at him. She was angry at him. It was present, a cold, specific anger at being kept outside the information she needed to protect herself. But underneath it, there was something else, something she didn't have the architecture to dismantle quickly, which was the fact that he had just told her the truth without performance, without layering it in language designed to minimize or redirect. She had asked, and he had answered, and she was aware that this was not a thing she should allow to matter to her, and that it mattered anyway. "What happens now?" she said. "Security protocols changed today. You won't go outside without 2 people. The east-facing rooms are off limits during daylight until we've assessed the sight lines." He paused. "I know that's fine," she said. He looked at her. "I'm not going to argue about my own safety," she said. "I'm not an idiot." Something in his expression moved, not quite relief, but adjacent to it. "No," he said. "You're not." She looked at the east window, the gray morning light coming through it now, ordinary and cold. "The chair's in the wrong spot," she said. "It's been in the wrong spot this whole time. Someone standing outside at the right angle could see—" She stopped. Started again. "I'll move it." Roman looked at the chair and at the window, and she watched him understand what she was telling him, that she had already, in the past 4 minutes, begun mapping her own vulnerability without being asked. "I should have told you sooner," he said again. Differently this time. Not as admission, as something closer to apology. "You should have," she agreed. They sat in the same room for another 30 seconds without speaking. The house was beginning to reassemble its morning sounds around them. Footsteps below, a door somewhere, the distant mechanical sound of the gate at the property entrance. "I'll have Celeste bring you breakfast here," Roman said. He stood. "I'll go to the kitchen," Willow said. "I'm not going to spend the day in this room." He looked at her for a moment, and she thought he was going to argue, and then he didn't. He nodded once, short and precise, and left. She moved the chair away from the window before she did anything else. The 2 men assigned to her that morning were named Garrett and Park. Garrett was broad and bearded and communicated primarily in monosyllables. Park was younger, with a quiet, watchful quality and the habit of scanning a room from its edges rather than its center. Neither of them pretended to be invisible, which she appreciated. She had been followed by invisible security before, in the early weeks, and found the performance of it more unsettling than the open presence. They sat outside the kitchen while she ate. They stood outside the library while she read. They followed her at a distance of 6 feet around the perimeter of the garden, the inner perimeter, the stone path closest to the house. When she needed air in the mid-afternoon and the 4 walls of the interior had begun to compress. She didn't speak to them. They didn't speak to her. But the day felt different with them present, more structured, more militarily coherent, like the house had shifted into a different operational register overnight. At 3 in the afternoon, she encountered the problem of the corridor again. Except this time it wasn't a problem she was overhearing. It was standing directly in front of her. His name was Vance. She had seen him before. Mid-30s, dark blonde, carrying the particular physical confidence of a man who had spent a long time near power and absorbed some of its gravity. He handled Roman's domestic security scheduling, and she had gathered from context that he had been with Roman for years. Long enough to have opinions. She came around the corner near the east staircase and nearly walked into him, and he stepped back with the automatic courtesy of someone who has been trained in exactly this kind of near collision. Then he looked at her face, and something in his expression did something subtle and ugly. "Mrs. Valenti," he said. "Vance," she said. A pause. He had something in his hand, a tablet, a report, something operational, and he adjusted his grip on it with the studied casualness of a man deciding whether to say the thing he was thinking. He said it. "You should think about staying in the East Wing today, given the morning." "I'm aware of the situation," she said. "Roman and I discussed it." "I know you did." Another pause. The subtle, ugly thing was still in his expression, unnamed and perfectly present. "It's just easier. If we know where you are, easier to manage." She looked at him directly. "Are you telling me to go to my room?" "I'm suggesting, are you telling me to go to my room, Vance?" Garrett had appeared at the end of the corridor, not moving, simply present. Park was somewhere behind her. Vance became aware of both of them. She could see him register the shift, and something in his jaw tightened. "No, ma'am," he said. "Good." She held his gaze for one more beat. Then she walked past him toward the main staircase, and her heart was knocking against her ribs with a force she hoped didn't show, and she breathed through it the way she had breathed through bad diner nights, when everything was wrong, and the only option was to keep moving. She didn't look back. At the end of the corridor, she heard Garrett say, very quietly, to no one visible, "Let it go." She didn't know if he was talking to Vance or to himself. Roman came home at 7 that evening. She heard the front door, heard the voices in the entrance hall that signaled his return, heard the house realign itself the way it always did when he was in it. Something she had noticed gradually, this property the household staff had for orienting themselves toward him. The subtle way everyone became slightly more purposeful. She was in the sitting room adjacent to her bedroom, reading without absorbing anything, when he appeared in the doorway. He knocked. She had stopped being surprised by the knocking. "I heard about Vance," he said. She set the book down. "He was fine. He was out of line. He backed down. It's fine." Roman stepped into the room. He looked tired in the same deep-settled way he had looked that morning in the garden. but the edge beneath it was sharper now. Something had happened during the day, something that had not resolved cleanly. Vance has been with me a long time, Roman said. That's the reason he said it, and the reason it doesn't matter. But I want you to know, I can fight my own corridor battles, she said. He stopped. I'm not asking you to correct him for me, she said. I handled it. It's done. She paused. What happened today? Outside this house. He looked at her for a moment. Then he moved to the other chair in the room, the one away from the window, she noticed again, always away from the window, and sat down. Maxime made contact, he said. She waited. Not directly, through an intermediary, someone who has worked in the space between our organizations before. Roman laced his fingers together. He wants a meeting. To negotiate. To gloat, Roman said. The meeting would be on his terms, on his ground, with his people. The intention isn't resolution, it's demonstration. He wants me to come to the table in a position of response rather than initiative. And if you go, I don't go. And if you don't go, he escalates. Roman looked at his hands, which he was going to do regardless. The invitation is theater. The escalation is the actual communication. Willow was quiet for a moment. She thought about 3 shots in the pre-dawn dark. She thought about the sight line from the tree line to the east window. She thought about whoever had stood in the trees with a rifle and the specific knowledge required to know which window to aim at. He knows where my rooms are, she said. Roman's hands tightened fractionally. He knows the layout, she continued. The east wall, the specific section. That's not general intelligence about the estate. That's detailed. That's... She stopped. Something cold moved through her. Someone gave him that. The silence in the room changed quality. Roman, she said. He looked up at her. Someone inside this house gave him the layout. He didn't answer immediately. That was its own answer. How long have you known? She said. I've suspected, he said. Since this morning. The shots were too precise in their targeting to be generalized surveillance. He knew which window. And you didn't tell me that either. I was trying to confirm before... You keep trying to confirm before you tell me things, Willow said. Her voice was still level, but the level was costing her. You keep managing information at the expense of my ability to understand what I'm standing in the middle of. I get that you've run things this way for years. I get that compartmentalizing is how you survive. But I am not one of your operations. I am your wife. I am the person in this house that someone is specifically targeting, and I need the information before it's confirmed, not after. Because the gap between the two is exactly where I get... She stopped, took a breath. Where I get shot at, she finished. The room was quiet. Roman looked at her with an expression she had not seen on him before. It was stripped of its usual management, its careful containment. What was underneath was something that looked, in its unguarded form, like a man who had been carrying something alone for a very long time and had just been asked, directly, to set it down. You're right, he said. She blinked. You're right, he said again. I've been running this the wrong way with you. That's a habit. It's not an excuse. She sat with that for a moment. Outside the window, the night was full and cold. Who do you think it is? She said. I don't know yet. He said it with the particular texture of a man who has a theory he hasn't confirmed. I have people working through it now, tonight. Is it Vance? The question came out neutral. She had not fully decided whether she believed it herself. It was simply the most recent face connected to ambiguity. Roman was quiet for long enough that the quiet became its own communication. Vance has been with me for 9 years, he said finally. I would not have believed it a week ago. And now I'm examining things I didn't think needed examination. She absorbed this. The fire in the sitting room fireplace, Celeste lit it each evening, she had discovered, regardless of whether anyone was in the room, crackled once and settled. The sound felt very ordinary against everything else. Tell me about Maxime, she said. Tell me who he actually is, not the operational summary, the real thing. Roman looked at her. If I'm a target, she said, I want to understand the person targeting me, not the outline of him, the actual person. Something in Roman's expression shifted again. That incremental opening she had noticed in the garden, the latch releasing before the handle. He began to talk. He talked for 40 minutes. Maxime Dragunov was 62 years old, the son of a shipping magnate from a city in the industrial north who had pivoted his father's legitimate freight operation into something considerably less legal in the mid-90s when the economy offered that particular choice to men with access to infrastructure. He had operated in the same regional space as Roman for over a decade, nominally a competitor, practically a parallel system. They had coexisted through mutual deterrence for most of that time. The destruction of Dragunov's northern network 2 years ago had not been personal on Roman's part. It had been strategic, the removal of a competing distribution channel that was creating price instability and attracting law enforcement attention. But Maxime had experienced it as personal, had taken it as a statement about his place and his power and his legacy, and had spent the intervening 2 years constructing a response. "He's not impulsive," Roman said. "That's what makes him effective. He waited 2 years to find the right angle. He found it. Me. He looked for a weakness. He spent time looking. He found—" Roman stopped. "He found the waitress," Willow said. "He found what he thought was a weakness," Roman said. His voice had changed quality, quieter, deliberate in a way that felt less like control and more like honesty. "He was wrong about that." She looked at him across the room. "Is that why you married me?" she said. "To put me inside the walls, where you could manage the vulnerability." It was the first time she had asked the question in that form. She had asked versions of it before, received versions of an answer, but the morning's events had stripped something from the exchange, made it harder to approach obliquely. Roman uncrossed his hands, put them on his knees, looked at her with those pale, cold eyes that were neither cold nor warm in this moment, but simply honest. "I married you because I couldn't find another way to do what I needed to do," he said. "Which was, get you inside the walls," he said. "Yes, but not the way you mean it." He paused. "I became aware of your family's situation 8 months before the debt reached its current level. I was aware of Ferris, the broker your mother used, because Ferris works adjacent to Maxime's network. The debt was going to be weaponized. It was a question of when." Willow's hands were very still in her lap. "You engineered this," she said. No. The word came out fast and certain. "The debt existed before I knew about it. I didn't create the situation. He stopped, adjusted. "I exploited it. I used the existing mechanism to achieve an outcome I had already decided I needed. Which was you, here, inside the walls." "Why?" The fire crackled. The house breathed around them. "Because Maxim was going to use you regardless," Roman said. "Whether you were married to me or working a double shift on Clement Street, he had already identified you. The question was whether you were inside the protection or outside it." He held her gaze. "I made the calculation that inside was better. And the debt, the repayment. The debt is gone. It was absorbed. Your mother will receive no further contact. And Rowan is entirely unaware and intends to stay that way." She was quiet for a long time. The thing she was assembling, slowly, in the space between them, was not the shape she had expected when she walked into her mother's apartment and found a stranger in the armchair. She had expected exploitation. She had expected the mechanics of control, a man purchasing an asset he intended to use. What she was assembling instead was something more complex and less comfortable to hold, because it required her to revise the framework she had been operating inside for the past 3 weeks. He had maneuvered her. He had used the debt as a mechanism. He had not asked her permission or her preference, or whether the outcome he had decided she needed matched what she actually wanted, and he had kept her safe. And he had knocked before entering rooms, and he had told her the truth tonight when she pressed him, and the night before, and in the garden, and he had said she was right when she was right. And every revision she tried to make toward the version of him that was purely transactional ran into the fact of his eyes in this moment, which contained something that was not the expression of a man managing an asset. She stood up. "I need to sleep," she said. Roman stood too automatically. "Of course. We'll talk more tomorrow." She moved toward the bedroom door, stopped, turned back. "The informant. The person inside this house who gave Maxime the layout." "Yes." "When you find out who it is," she said, "I want to know. Before you do anything about it. I want to know." He looked at her for a moment. Okay, she said. She went to bed and lay in the dark and listened to the house and thought about all the ways a person could be inside walls and still not be safe, and all the ways they could be exposed and still survive. And she was still thinking about it when she finally went to sleep somewhere past midnight, her hand pressed flat against the mattress like she was checking for solid ground. The answer came in 48 hours. It was not Vance. It was Rowan. Not deliberately, not as an act of betrayal. Rowan, who was entirely unaware of what he was, had been cultivated for 6 weeks by a woman who had introduced herself as a graduate student researching urban estate architecture. She had asked Rowan questions about his family, about his sister's new life, about the property she had described during a Sunday phone call when she'd mentioned the east-facing rooms and the view of the maple trees and the stone wall. Rowan had answered the way people answer when they believe they're talking to someone harmless. He had filled in the gaps in Maxime's intelligence with the innocent precision of someone who had no idea there were gaps, or that intelligence was the operative word. Rowan told her at breakfast. He set a photograph on the table. A woman, early 30s, photographed in a coffee shop 2 blocks from Rowan's campus. He said her name. He explained the 6 weeks of contact. He explained what she had extracted and how. Willow looked at the photograph. She looked at it for a long time. Her coffee went cold. Then she looked up at Roman across the table and said, very quietly, "He still doesn't know." "No," Roman said. "He doesn't know anything. And the woman has been removed from the situation." "Removed?" "She left the city last night," Roman said. The particular economy of that sentence was its own explanation. Willow put both palms flat on the table. The surface was cool and solid under her hands. She breathed through the thing that was happening in her chest, the complicated, nauseating thing that came from understanding that her brother, her careful, brilliant, oblivious brother, had been the instrument of her exposure. That Maxim Dragunov had looked at her family and found the most efficient entry point and used it with the casual expertise of someone who had been hurting people's soft places for 40 years. "He can't know," she said. "Rowan can't find out." "I know." "It would—" She stopped. "He'd never forgive himself. He doesn't know. He didn't know. It's not—" She pressed her lips together. "You can't tell him." "I won't," Roman said. Steady, absolute. "I won't." She nodded, pulled her hands back, put them in her lap where they could shake without being visible, except the table was glass and he could see them anyway, and she watched him see them and chose not to look away from that, which was its own kind of decision. "Maxim knows where Rowan is," she said. "Yes." "Which means Rowan is now." "I've already moved people," Roman said. "Rowan has had coverage since 6 this morning. He doesn't know. It looks like a campus security adjustment. He won't notice." She looked at Roman Valenti across a glass breakfast table in a house she had lived in for 3 weeks, and she understood, with sudden and irreversible clarity, that the transaction she had walked into was not the transaction that existed, that the man across from her had been moving pieces on a board that was larger and older and more personal than any arrangement they had signed in a mahogany library, and that the choice she had made in the flooded living room at midnight, the practical, self-sacrificing, necessary choice, had placed her at the center of something she could not now choose to leave, because leaving would not undo what Maxim Dragunov had already set in motion. She was not inside the walls. She was the reason for the walls. And somewhere across the city, a man who had spent 2 years building toward this moment had just learned that his instrument had worked, and that the woman he intended to use to break Roman Valenti was exactly where he wanted her. The front door of the estate opened at that moment. A security rotation, ordinary, timed. And through the breakfast room window, Willow saw the gate at the end of the drive standing open for exactly 30 seconds, while the morning shift exchanged with the outgoing night team, and in the gap between the closing of the gate and the click of its latch, she felt the exposure of it like a current. 30 seconds. Somewhere, someone was counting those seconds too. Her phone buzzed on the table. Rowan's name on the screen. She looked at it, looked at Roman. He was watching her with those pale, careful eyes. She picked up the phone. "Hey," she said. Her voice came out normal. She had spent years making her voice come out normal. "How's the Brennan paper?" And across the table, Roman Valenti watched her protect her brother with the same steady, exhausted grace he had watched her deploy since the night they met. And she felt his eyes on her, and she felt the weight of what she now knew. And she answered Rowan's questions and laughed at his terrible joke about his professor and said goodbye and set the phone down on the glass table. The gate at the end of the drive was closed. The morning was very quiet. Neither of them spoke. Then Roman said, "I need you to understand something." She looked at him. "He's not going to stop," Roman said. "What happened this morning? The intel, the rifle, the woman near Rowan's campus. That's the opening. He's been building to this for 2 years, and now that he's confirmed the angle, he's going to accelerate." His voice was even, but the thing beneath it was not even. It was something controlled and volcanic, the heat of it reaching the surface through small variations in cadence and pressure. "This is not going to resolve quietly. I need you to know that." She held his gaze. "I know," she said. "It's going to get worse before—" "I know," she said again, not angry, just certain. "I've known since the shots this morning. I'm not—" She exhaled. "I'm not going to fall apart on you. I just need you to keep telling me the truth. Can you do that?" He looked at her with something raw and unmanaged in his face. "Yes," he said. "Then we're okay," she said. She pushed back her chair, stood, picked up her cold coffee and walked toward the kitchen to make a fresh cup. And at the doorway she stopped because she felt something behind her, a quality of attention, specific and weighty. And when she turned, Roman was watching her from across the breakfast table with an expression she had never seen on any human face directed at her before. Not possession, not calculation. Something older and quieter and considerably more dangerous. She turned back to the kitchen before he could see what it did to her face. The coffee maker ran its cycle. Outside the kitchen window, a car she didn't recognize rolled slowly past the gate and didn't stop. Her hands were steady. Her heart was not. The war had found her. And for the first time since she had traded her freedom for her family's safety, she understood that she was not simply a piece being moved across the board. She was the board. And Maxim Dragunov had just made his opening move against the one man in the city who would burn everything down before he let her. The car that rolled past the gate did not come back. Not that morning. Not that afternoon. Willow watched for it from the sitting room window without admitting to herself that she was watching for it. Standing slightly to the left of the glass the way she had learned to stand. Present but not visible. Aware but not exposed. The adjustment had happened automatically, without instruction, sometime in the 48 hours since the rifle shots. Her body had started making its own security calculations. She wasn't sure whether that was adaptation or damage. Roman spent the day on the phone. She could hear him through the walls occasionally. Not words, just the cadence of it. The particular flat authority of a man who spoke to dangerous people so routinely that danger had ceased to alter his register. She had stopped finding this unsettling. She had started, uncomfortably, finding it steadying. At 4 in the afternoon, Garrett knocked and told her Roman wanted her in the main study. She went. The study was on the north side of the house, which she had learned meant Roman's side. The wing where he slept and worked and whatever else he did in the hours when the rest of the house was still. She had been in this room once before, briefly, in the first week. It was large and deliberately undecorated except for the bookshelves along 2 walls and a topographical map of the city tacked to a corkboard near the window, covered in handwritten annotations she had not been close enough to read. She was close enough now. Roman was standing at the map when she entered. 2 other men were in the room. She recognized one as the head of the night security rotation, a man named Dresch, compact and expressionless, with the particular physical economy of someone who had been violent professionally for long enough that the potential for it was simply ambient. The other she didn't know. "Close the door," Roman said. She closed it. "We've located Maxim," Roman said. He didn't turn from the map. "He's been operating out of the waterfront district for the past 3 weeks. A facility in the old Caldwell processing buildings, industrial block, private dock access, defensible." He touched a point on the map. "He brought additional people into the city 8 days ago. 12, possibly 14. That's not a negotiating team. That's a strike force." "He's planning to move," Dresch said. "He's already moving," Roman said. The rifle was the announcement. The woman near the campus was intelligence gathering. The next step is action. He turned from the map and looked at Willow directly. "I need you to understand the timeline." "Tell me," she said. "We have 48 hours, maybe 72, before he commits to something large enough to be irreversible. Once he moves openly, it becomes a different situation, one that's harder to contain, harder to resolve without collateral damage. Roman's jaw was tight. I have a plan. It requires moving some operations tonight. It requires you to stay in the interior rooms, center of the house, away from all exterior walls, for the next 24 hours minimum. Okay, she said. He looked at her, seemed to be waiting for resistance. I said okay, she said. I heard you. Something in his expression, not quite gratitude, but the shape of it. He turned back to Dresch and the unknown man and spoke quickly, tactically, in the compressed language of operational planning, and she stood near the door and listened and absorbed what she could and filed away what she didn't yet understand. She was crossing the entrance hall on her way back to the interior rooms when she heard the voice. He told you 48 hours. She stopped. Vance was standing near the base of the staircase. His arms were crossed and his face was doing the thing it did, the careful professional blankness that occasionally let something through its surface like heat through a thin wall. Yes, she said. Did he tell you why 48 hours specifically? She looked at him. He said that's when Maxime commits to open action. He said that, Vance said. The way he said it made her skin tighten. What does that mean? She said. It means... Vance stopped, uncrossed his arms, looked at the floor for a moment, then back at her, and what she saw in his face was not the low-grade contempt she had grown accustomed to reading there. It was something more complicated, something that looked uncomfortably like conflict. There are things about this situation he hasn't told you. There are things about every situation he hasn't told me, she said. He's working on it. Not this thing. Her chest was doing something it had not done since the morning of the rifle shots. That particular coldness, not fear exactly, but the physiological anticipation of bad information. Say it, she said. Vance looked at her for a long moment. She had the impression of a man making a calculation that had already been made and revised multiple times and was being made again from the beginning. And she said nothing, did not press him, simply stood in the entrance hall with her hands at her sides and waited. The debt wasn't the only mechanism, Vance said. The debt was the formal instrument, but the reason Ferris went to your mother specifically, the reason your family was chosen out of every family in this city that owed money to people adjacent to Maxime's network, he stopped. Why? She said. Because Roman told him to. The entrance hall was very still. Ferris works for Roman, Vance said. Has for 6 years. He operates in the margins, debt brokering, financial pressure, the kind of instrument you use when you need leverage that doesn't look like leverage. Roman didn't create your mother's debt, but he directed Ferris toward her. He chose her specifically. He chose your family. Willow heard herself breathe, in, out. The sound of it felt very loud. Why? She said. Her voice came out flat, scraped of everything. Because he'd been watching you for 2 years, Vance said, and he needed a mechanism, something that looked like necessity, something that would bring you inside the walls without... Vance's jaw moved, without it looking like what it was. What was it? She said. Vance looked at her steadily. Acquisition, he said. The word went through her like something physical, not a punch, something quieter and more thorough. A displacement. Like the ground had moved 6 inches to the left and she was standing in the place where it had been. He watched me, she said, for 2 years. He directed the broker toward my mother. Yes. He manufactured the mechanism that forced me to... Yes. She was quiet for a very long time. Down the corridor, a door opened and closed. Somewhere above them, footsteps crossed a floor. The house continued its ordinary business around the sudden wreckage of what she had believed was true. Why are you telling me this? She said. Vance's expression shifted. Because you asked me in the corridor whether I was telling you to go to your room, he said, and you looked at me like you already knew the answer and you needed me to say it to your face. He shook his head slightly. I'm not the right kind of man to work for the wrong reasons. I've been working out what the right reasons are for 9 years. He paused. I thought you should know what you're working out. She looked at him. Is this real? She said. Or is this you delivering a message from Maxim Dragunov? Vance blinked. The question had landed somewhere unexpected. Because that would be, she said, the more elegant play. Create doubt between us. Fracture the trust at the exact moment when we need it intact. Get me to... It's real, Vance said. His voice had roughened. I have no contact with Dragunov. I have never had contact with Dragunov. You can pull every communication I've made in the last 5 years, and you will not find... Then show me, she said. He stopped. Take me to Roman, she said. Right now. Walk me into that study and say it again with him in the room. Vance stood very still. If you're telling me the truth, she said, you'll do it. The silence stretched for 8 seconds. She counted them. Then Vance moved toward the north corridor. She followed him. Roman looked up when the study door opened and something moved across his face. Surprise first, and then a rapid practiced reassembly. And then he saw Vance behind her, and the reassembly stopped halfway. Dresch and the unknown man were gone. The room held only the 3 of them and the annotated map and the particular quality of air that precedes a detonation. Tell him what you told me, Willow said. She stood in the center of the room. She did not go to a chair. She did not close the distance between herself and Roman. She stood in the center of the room, and her hands were at her sides, and her voice was the flattest, most carefully controlled thing she had ever produced. Roman looked at Vance. Vance said it. All of it. Ferris. The 2 years. The deliberate direction of the debt instrument toward her family. The mechanism that wasn't necessity, but was designed to look like necessity. Roman listened without moving. When Vance finished, the room was completely silent. Roman looked at Willow. She had thought, in the 60 seconds it had taken to walk from the entrance hall to the study, about what she would see in his face when this moment arrived. She had expected denial. She had expected the smooth repositioning of a man accustomed to managing narrative. She had expected something political and practiced and ultimately unconvincing. What she saw was none of those things. What she saw was Roman Valenti not looking away. Is it true? She said. Yes, he said. She nodded once, small and precise. Ferris is yours, she said. Yes. He approached my mother because you directed him to. Yes. You chose my family specifically. Yes. Because you had been watching me. A pause. One beat. Yes. For 2 years. Yes. Each yes landed in the room like a weight being added to a scale. She felt the accumulation of them, the specific compounding gravity of a truth she had not been given the option to know before she made the choice she made in her mother's living room at midnight. I want you to understand something, Roman said. His voice was controlled, but the control had an audible cost now. The threat from Maxime was real. I didn't manufacture that. The debt existed before I directed Ferris toward it. Your family was already on the margin of that network. I accelerated. You accelerated it, she said. I accelerated a process that was already in motion, and I controlled how it landed. Without my involvement, the debt would have run its natural course, and Rowan would have... Don't, she said. Don't justify it with what would have happened. You took a situation that you could have resolved differently, a dozen different ways, and you used it to acquire me. That's what Vance said. Acquisition. That's what this was. That's not... Is that word wrong? Her voice cracked on the last word, the first fracture in the flat surface, and she pulled it back instantly. Is acquisition the wrong word for what you did? Roman was silent. Look at me, she said. He was already looking at her. He had not stopped looking at her. You had 2 years, she said. 2 years. You could have knocked on my door. You could have walked into the diner. You could have done anything. Anything that gave me a choice that wasn't built on a mechanism you controlled from the beginning. Her voice was low now, not quiet but compressed, the kind of low that comes from suppressing something that would be very large if it got out. But you didn't, because if you'd walked into the diner, I would have said no. And you needed me to not be able to say no. Roman's jaw was rigid. The muscle along his cheekbone moved once. Yes, he said. The word was different from the previous yeses. It came from somewhere below his usual register. It came from somewhere she thought he probably hadn't intended to let her see. She turned to Vance. Leave us. Vance left. The door closed. She walked to the window. Not the one facing the map, the other one, the north-facing one overlooking the driveway, and stood with her back to Roman and looked at the cold March sky and breathed through everything that was happening in her chest. She had believed for the past 3 weeks that she had made a choice. A terrible, constrained, bounded choice with walls on all four sides. But a choice. Her agency had lived in it. Her sense of herself as someone who could act rather than simply be acted upon had lived in it. She had walked into the living room and found 3 men in suits, and she had negotiated. She had set terms. She had protected Rowan and her mother, and she had done it by deciding to sacrifice herself. That story had been the structure she'd been standing on, and the structure was false. There had never been a moment of genuine choice. The mechanism had been built before she arrived. The walls had been assembled around a specific person, her, with specific purpose, her. And she had walked into the room and said, "I will do this to save my family." And the whole architecture had been designed to make that the only sentence available to her. She heard Roman move, heard him stop. He had not come closer. "Willow," he said. "Don't. I need to—" I said don't. She pressed her palm against the cold window glass. The cold moved through her hand and up her wrist, and she focused on it. "I need a minute. Give me a minute." He went silent. She stood at the window and gave herself exactly 60 seconds. She counted them internally, the way she had stood in her mother's living room, and counted 3 minutes before she could be useful to anyone. 60 seconds for the full weight of it to arrive and be registered and be survived. 60 seconds for the initial shock of it to pass through her rather than settling into paralysis. At 60, she turned around. Roman was standing in the center of the room. He had not sat down. He had not retreated to the map or the desk or any of the places in this room where he was usually positioned. He stood in the open center of it with his hands at his sides, and his face had the stripped, unmanaged quality she had seen briefly the night before, but broader now, wider open, more exposed. He looked like a man who had been waiting for a specific moment for 2 years and had discovered, upon its arrival, that the preparation had not been sufficient. "You thought I wouldn't find out," she said. "I thought by the time you found out, the context would be different." "Yes." "You thought I would know you well enough by then that it would—" She stopped. "What?" "Land differently." "Yes." The word cost him something visible. "That's manipulative," she said. "That's manipulative in a way that doesn't get better with context. You built a container around me and then spent 3 weeks being decent inside it, and you thought the decency would justify the container." Roman looked at her with those pale, exhausted eyes. "Yes," he said, for the 4th time. The word had been stripped of everything except honesty. She absorbed it. "The feeling," she said slowly, "whatever this was, the 2 years of watching, the mechanism, that was real. What you felt." He was very still. "That part," she said, "was that real?" "Yes," he said, immediately, without qualification. She looked at him for a long time. "That doesn't fix it," she said. "I know. It doesn't excuse it. I know that. I may not be able to—" She stopped. Her voice had done something complicated. She managed it. "I don't know what I can do with this yet. I need time to know what I can do with this." "I know," he said, "but I need you to hear something first." He waited. "I am angry," she said. "I am genuinely, specifically, not going away angry at what you did and how you did it, and the fact that the choice I thought I made was never real. I need you to know that's not going to disappear because you keep being honest now." She held his gaze. "But there is a man across this city who is building towards something that is going to happen in 48 hours. And that man is a threat to Rowan and to my mother and to me. And I'm not going to let my anger at you compromise my ability to deal with that. So whatever we are right now, and I genuinely don't know what we are, we need to still be functional. We need to still communicate. We need to still be able to operate in the same room." Roman looked at her as if she had said something in a language he spoke but rarely heard. "Can you do that?" she said. "Yes," he said. "Can I trust the information you give me going forward, all of it?" "Yes." "Including the parts that don't—" She stopped. "Including the parts where the truth doesn't benefit you." "Yes," he said. And then, "The debt is gone. Rowan is protected. Your mother has no further exposure. Those things are true, and they were true before tonight." "I know," she said. "That's the part that makes this complicated." She walked to the door. She stopped with her hand on the handle and said, without turning around, "The 48 hours. What do you need from me? Stay in the interior rooms, stay close to Garrett and Park. Answer my calls immediately. Don't make any contact with Rowan or your mother that mentions specifics about the estate or your location. Okay? Willow." She turned slightly, not fully. "Enough." "I'm sorry," Roman said. She looked at the door, at the wood grain of it, old and polished and absolute. "I know you are," she said. She opened the door and walked back through the north corridor to the interior of the house, and she did not allow herself to stop moving until she reached the sitting room and the door was closed behind her, and then she sat down on the floor. Not the chair, the floor, with her back against the foot of the bed, because the floor was solid and low and specific, and she needed something that wasn't going to change its shape. She sat there for an hour. She thought about her mother's hands trembling. She thought about the photograph in her wallet of Rowan at his graduation. She thought about the coffee she drank every morning at the east window before she moved the chair. She thought about Roman Valenti in the garden, pointing at the first green of the maple trees and saying, "Most things get less strange," and she thought about how much of that sentence was true, and how much of it was a man managing the distance between what he'd done and what he wanted to have done. She thought about the word acquisition. She thought about 2 years. At the end of the hour, she stood up. She went to the bathroom. She ran cold water over her face and looked at herself in the mirror for a long time and said, internally, in the flattest possible internal voice, "You are still here. You have been in situations that required you to keep moving. Keep moving." She dried her face. Her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer. Then she answered. "Hello, Willow." The voice was accented, faintly, precisely, like someone who had worked to reduce an original texture to its minimum detectable trace. Male, older, unhurried. Her stomach dropped through the floor. "Maxim Dragunov," she said. A pause, appreciative almost. "Roman has been thorough," he said. "You know my name. What do you want?" "To introduce myself properly," he said. "We've been neighbors for several weeks now. That feels like a gap worth closing." A pause, unhurried. "Your brother is a very intelligent young man, pre-law, an interest in public defense. That's admirable. A family that produces people who want to defend the vulnerable. That's something to be proud of." She gripped the phone with both hands. Her knuckles whitened without her instruction. "You stay away from him," she said. "I have stayed away from him," Maxim said pleasantly. "I've been careful about that, very deliberate, because the value of a proximity, the value of having access to someone you love, is highest when that access is unused." He paused. "Do you understand what I mean?" She understood exactly what he meant. The threat was sharpest when it was potential. The moment it was deployed, it diminished. He was telling her he had not moved against Rowan because the unspent threat was worth more than the spent one. "What do you want?" she said again. "I want Roman to come to a meeting," Maxim said. "A real one, not the theater I offered before. A genuine conversation about terms, about the future shape of things in this city." Another pause. Perfectly measured. "I want you to convince him to come." "Why would I?" "Because if he doesn't come," Maxim said, and the pleasantness left his voice like a tide going out, leaving something gray and flat and cold behind it. "I'm going to stop being careful about your brother." She stood in the center of the sitting room with the phone pressed to her ear and felt the walls close in by exactly 1 degree. "I'll need time," she said. "You have until 9 tomorrow morning," Maxim said. "That's very generous of me." The line went dead. She stood holding the dead phone. 19 hours. She could go to Roman right now. She could walk back through the north corridor and put the phone in his hands and let him manage it, let him run his operational calculations, let him make the decision about the meeting and Rowan and the 48-hour timeline, and she could stand in the periphery of it the way she had been standing in the periphery of everything in this house for 3 weeks and be kept safe and be managed and be protected. She looked at the phone. She thought about everything Roman had taken from her, the genuine choice, the real agency, the untampered truth of her own decision. She thought about everything he had given her in spite of it, the truth tonight when it cost him, the honest yeses, The fact that he was in a room right now building a plan to protect the people she loved. She thought about Rowan. Pre-law, public defense. Never done a single thing to deserve this. She put the phone in her pocket and walked back toward the north corridor. And for the first time since she had moved the chair away from the east window, she was not walking because she was keeping herself in motion. She was walking because she had decided something. The waitress who had spent 3 weeks surviving inside walls built by someone else had just run out of patience with the walls. Whatever happened in the next 19 hours was going to happen because she chose it. And the first choice was to walk into the room where Roman Valenti was standing with his maps and his plans and his 2-year secret, and tell him about the phone call, and tell him what she had decided, and watch him understand that the woman he had spent 2 years engineering into his life had just become something he had. She walked into the study and put the phone on the map. Roman looked at it, looked at her face. He was already reading her before she spoke. She could see him doing it, the rapid assessment, the intake of every available data point. She had stopped finding it invasive. She had started understanding it as the thing that kept people alive in his proximity. "Maxime called me," she said. "On my cell. Unknown number." Roman went very still. "He wants a meeting, a real one. He wants me to convince you to come." She kept her voice flat and sequential, the way she had learned to deliver bad information at the diner when something was wrong in the kitchen and the table was already waiting. Facts first, reaction later. "He said if you don't come by 9 tomorrow morning, he stops being careful about Rowan." Roman picked up the phone, looked at the call log, set it back down. "He has your number," he said. "Yes. That's inside information. Your number isn't public. It's not associated with your name anywhere accessible." He turned from the desk. His jaw was rigid. "He has a current source. Not the woman near the campus. Someone active. Someone with access to household information right now." "I know," she said. "This changes the Roman." She waited until he looked at her directly. "I'm not finished." He stopped. "I'm not going to stand in the interior rooms for 19 hours while you run this," she said. "I'm not going to be the thing you protect. I'm going to be part of how this ends." She held his gaze. "I know about the mechanism. I know about Ferris. I know what you did and why you did it, and I know it was wrong, and we are going to have the full accounting of that when this is over. But right now, tonight, what I know is that Maxim Dragunov has a phone number he shouldn't have, and 19 hours on a clock, and my brother is a variable in his calculation." She breathed in, out. "So tell me the plan. All of it. And then tell me where I fit." Roman looked at her for a long moment. "You don't have to." "Don't," she said. "Don't tell me what I have to do. We're past that." He looked at her with something in his face that she recognized now. The unguarded version of him. The one that had emerged incrementally over 3 weeks of proximity and had arrived fully tonight in the aftermath of the truth. He looked at her the way a man looks at something he has no precedent for, something that doesn't correspond to any category he's been operating with. Then he turned to the map and began to talk. The plan was surgical and extremely dangerous and required Maxime to believe, for approximately 6 hours, that Roman was considering the meeting. It required feeding him confirmation of that consideration through whoever the active source inside the house was, which meant identifying that source within the next 2 hours and using them rather than removing them. It required Roman's people to move on the Caldwell building before dawn, establish position, and be in place before Maxime had any indication that the response was not compliance but assault. It required Willow to make a call. "He called you," Roman said. "That means he's established you as a channel. If you call him back, agree to the meeting, confirm the time, he believes the mechanism is working. He relaxes. He stops looking outward because he's watching inward, waiting for Roman to walk into the room." He looked at her. "You become the instrument that closes the gap." "I'm used to being an instrument," she said. The words came out before she weighed them. They landed between them with an edge she hadn't fully intended but didn't retract. Roman absorbed them without defense. "Yes," he said quietly. "I know." The source was found at 11:47 p.m. Not Vance, not any of the security rotations. It was a woman named Sella, who had worked the household kitchen for 4 months, hired through a staffing agency that Dresch had flagged as a potential exposure point 2 weeks ago and not yet fully investigated. She had been transmitting through an app on her phone. Nothing sophisticated, simple and invisible in its ordinariness. Location data, schedule information, room assignments. The cell number of the new Mrs. Valenti, copied from the household contact list maintained by Celeste. Roman told Willow at midnight. His voice was the controlled flat of a man who is managing fury through sheer operational discipline. "Don't remove her," Willow said immediately. "Not yet. If she disappears, Maxime knows the channel is burned." Roman looked at her. "She stays until after the call," Willow said. "I make the call. She transmits the confirmation. He believes it." She paused. "Then you deal with her." "You're thinking tactically," he said. "I've been thinking tactically since I moved the chair away from the east window," she said. "I just didn't have enough information to do it usefully." He was quiet for a moment, then, "The call needs to happen before 2 a.m. I need the confirmation in Maxime's hands with enough lead time that he doesn't second-guess it before my people are in position. Write down what you need me to say." "Don't script it," Roman said. "He'll hear the script." He's not..." He stopped. "He's not an easy man to deceive. You need to mean it enough that it sounds like you mean it." She looked at him. "What do I mean?" "That you're scared," Roman said. "That you pushed Roman to consider the meeting because you're scared about your brother. That you believe this is the fastest path to resolution." He held her gaze. "All of which is probably true enough to say without lying." She thought about that. "Yes," she said. She made the call at 1:15 in the morning, standing in the north corridor outside the study with Roman 3 feet away and Garrett at the end of the hall, and the phone in her hand like a stone she was about to throw at something she couldn't fully see. Maxime answered on the second ring. "I talked to him," she said. No preamble. The way she would have said it if she were actually frightened and trying to sound controlled. She was frightened. She was trying to sound controlled. The performance and the truth occupied the same words simultaneously. "He's considering it." "Considering," Maxime said. "He's not. He doesn't move fast on things like this. He calculates." She breathed deliberately, let the breath be audible. "I told him what you said about Rowan. He heard it." A pause. Maxime listening to the textures of her voice. She held herself very still and thought about Rowan at the loading dock, entirely unaware, and let what she felt about that be present in her voice without naming it. 9 a.m., Maxime said. "He'll be there," she said. "And you?" She hadn't expected that, felt the floor tilt slightly. "Me. I'd like you there, Willow." So Roman understands the stakes are physical and immediate, not theoretical. She looked at Roman. He had heard it. The corridor was quiet enough. His face had gone completely still, the particular stillness of suppressed violence. "Fine," she said. "I'll be there?" She ended the call. Roman said, "No. He expects me there. I don't care what he expects. If I'm not there, he knows something is wrong. He has enough experience to read an absence." She turned to face him fully. "I go. I stay behind your people. I don't engage, but I go." "Willow, you built this entire situation around keeping me inside walls," she said. Her voice was even and very cold. "You don't get to do it again tonight." The words hit. She saw them hit. Roman's face moved through something. Not anger, something more complicated than anger. The particular pain of a man confronting the direct consequence of his own choices. "If something happens to you," he started. "Then something happens to me," she said. "That's what it means to be in this. That's what it means to not be managed." She held his gaze. "I'm not asking you to be comfortable with it. I'm telling you this is how it goes." He looked at her for a long moment. The house was very quiet around them. "Stay behind Garrett," he said, "at all times. If I say get down, you get down. If I say move, you move. No arguments in the field. Agreed. And you tell no one. Not Rowan, not your mother." "Obviously," she said. He turned back to the study. At the door, he stopped. "Get some sleep," he said. 2 hours minimum. You can't function without it." She almost said she couldn't sleep. Then she thought about 11-hour shifts and double shifts and the particular skill of sleeping in small windows whenever the window appeared. A skill she had spent her adult life perfecting. "Okay," she said. She slept for 90 minutes. It was not restful sleep. It was the pragmatic, utilitarian sleep of someone who needed their body to function and had set aside the luxury of peace for later. She woke at 4 a.m. to her phone alarm, sat up immediately, and was dressed in 45 seconds. Garrett was in the corridor. "Ready?" she said. He looked at her for a moment. Then he nodded. "Ready." They moved out at 4:30. 7 vehicles. Willow in the fourth, between Garrett and Park. Roman in the second vehicle ahead of her. The city was dark and wet. It had rained again overnight, the streets slick and empty, the orange streetlights smearing across the pavement in long horizontal lines. She watched the city pass and thought about the last time she had been driven through it in a black SUV with tinted windows, moving north away from Clement Street toward a life she hadn't chosen. She had not chosen this one either, exactly. She was choosing the next part. The Caldwell Processing Complex sat at the southern end of the waterfront district. 3 industrial buildings arranged in a loose L shape around a central yard, flanked by a private dock that jutted into the dark water. The buildings were pre-war concrete, thick-walled and deeply shadowed, the kind of architecture that predated the expectation of transparency. The windows were high and narrow. The dock access was gated. The whole complex smelled, even from a distance, of salt water and old machinery and the particular cold of spaces that have not been warm for a long time. Roman's people had been in position since 3 a.m. She could not see them. That was the point. Their vehicle stopped 2 blocks east of the complex. Roman came back to their vehicle on foot, moving quickly, his jacket dark, his face set in the operational blankness she recognized now as the version of him that existed when the calculation was complete and the execution had begun. 2 vehicles inside the yard, he said. 6 confirmed hostiles on the ground floor. Maxime is in the central building, upper level. He looked at Willow. My people go in at 05:30. That gives us 11 minutes from now. Where do I... You stay in this vehicle until the building is clear. His voice was absolute. I'm not negotiating this one. She looked at him. And if it doesn't clear, it will clear. Roman. He met her eyes. For a moment, the operational blankness dropped entirely, and what was underneath was raw and specific and not at all managed. It will clear, he said, because I will make it clear. He moved back to his vehicle. 11 minutes was a very long time to sit in a dark car 2 blocks from a waterfront building that was about to become a battlefield. Willow sat with her back straight and her hands in her lap and counted her breathing the way she had learned to count it in the corridor outside her mother's apartment. In for 4, out for 4, over and over, a metronome against the noise her nervous system wanted to make. Garrett sat beside her and said nothing. Park sat on her other side and said nothing. Both of them had the particular quality of stillness she had come to understand as professionals in the final minutes before action. Not calm, but focused, every available resource concentrated on what was coming rather than distributed across the broad field of general awareness. At 05:29, Garrett said quietly, "Here we go." She didn't hear the entry. She felt it, a distant concussion, like something large making a decision, and then the radio in the front of the vehicle came alive with clipped transmissions in shorthand she could only partially follow. Movement, contact, secondary access point. Roman's voice once, brief and directional, and then other voices responding with coordinates and status she couldn't fully decode. Then the vehicles in the yard were moving. She could see one of them through the windshield, headlights sweeping across the wet concrete of the yard, 2 figures running along the building's south wall. A light went on in the upper level of the central building and then went off. Somewhere inside the complex, a door slammed hard enough to feel it. Gunfire. Not continuous. Burst, pause, burst. The asymmetric rhythm of a fight in an enclosed space where people were moving and positions were changing. She gripped the edge of the seat with both hands and said nothing and breathed in for 4 and out for 4, and the radio kept talking. 4 minutes. 5. The gunfire became intermittent and then stopped. Then Roman's voice on the radio, flat and immediate. "Building is clear. Bring her in." Garrett opened the door. Willow got out of the vehicle and walked across the wet concrete of the Caldwell yard with Garrett on her left and Park on her right, and the taste of salt air and adrenaline in the back of her throat. And the central building's main door was standing open with 2 of Roman's men positioned beside it. And inside the corridor was lit by emergency lighting, cold, blue-white, casting everything in the particular clarity of a stage. She followed Garrett through the corridor and up a staircase with a metal railing cold enough to sting through her palm. And at the top of the stairs was a door standing open, and through it was a large room that had once been something industrial and was now empty except for a folding table, several chairs, a portable heating unit, the evidence of several days of habitation, food containers, equipment cases, maps tacked to the walls, and the men who occupied it. Roman was standing in the center of the room. 4 of his men flanked the space. 2 of Maxim's men were on the floor, disarmed. 1 more was against the far wall with his hands behind his head. Maxim Dragunov was seated in a chair in the center of the room, and he was not what she had built in her mind. She had built a monster. She had built something that matched the scale of what he had done. Large, physically imposing, visibly ruthless. What she found was a man of 62 who looked like someone's retired uncle, heavy-set and gray-haired with a round face and small, dark eyes that were extraordinary in their stillness. He sat in the chair with his hands on his knees and looked at the room with the composed assessment of a chess player examining a board after a move he had predicted but had hoped wouldn't come. He looked at Willow. "There she is," he said, almost pleasantly. "Maxime," Roman said. 1 word, and it carried the weight of 2 years and the morning's gunfire and every calculation both of them had made in the interval. "You brought her," Maxime said, "after everything." He tilted his head slightly. "That's either very confident or very sentimental. With you, I could never be sure which." "This is over," Roman said. "Probably," Maxime agreed. He looked remarkably untroubled. This, she realized, was also tactical. The composed acceptance of the man who has been caught, because an untroubled man appears to have something left in reserve. "You've been effective tonight. You always are." He looked at Willow again. "Did he tell you how he chose you?" She said nothing. "Did he tell you about the 2 years? About Ferris?" His voice remained pleasant, informational. "He thought it would make him look calculated, smart. He thought he could manage when you found out." A small smile. "Men like Roman are very good at managing things, not always people." "He told me," she said. Maxim's eyebrows rose slightly. "Did he?" "He told me tonight, when I pressed him." Maxim looked at Roman with something that was not quite respect but was in its neighborhood. "Voluntarily," he said. "She pressed," Roman said. Maxim appeared to consider this. "That changes the texture somewhat." He looked back at Willow with those small, still eyes. "What are you going to do with it?" "That's not your business," she said. He smiled fully this time. It reached his eyes, which made it worse somehow. "No," he said. "I suppose it isn't." He looked at Roman. "So, what now?" "Now we have a different conversation," Roman said. "About the network. About the 14 people you brought into this city. About every piece of infrastructure you've built in the last 2 years. His voice was absolutely level and absolutely final, like a door that has been shut and locked from the inside. "And you're going to be extremely specific." Maxim looked at him, then looked at Willow, then back at Roman. "You know," Maxim said conversationally, "I spent a great deal of time looking for what would break you. I was certain it existed. Everyone has a soft place." He laced his fingers together over his knees. "I found her, and I thought, yes, there it is." He paused. "I was wrong about what she was." "Yes," Roman said, "you were. She's not the soft place." "No." Maxim nodded slowly, as if confirming something he had begun to suspect. "She's the spine," he said. The room was very quiet. Willow felt the words land, not with vanity, not with satisfaction, with the particular complicated weight of being accurately seen by someone who had spent weeks trying to destroy her. Then Maxim's right hand moved. The movement was small and practiced and came from somewhere below the line of the folding table where no one had adequately checked, and Garrett shouted and Roman moved, not toward Maxim, but toward Willow, 3 fast steps, putting his body in the space between her and the room. And the sound that followed was not a gunshot but something smaller, a tactical device, a compact flashbang that detonated against the base of the folding table and turned the world into white noise and blinding light, and the physical shock of pressure against every surface. She went down. Not because she was hit. Her hands hit the floor first, she registered that. her palms and knees on cold concrete, and the room was full of shouting and movement she could not fully track because her vision was fractured and her ears were producing a single sustained tone that overrode everything. Something heavy hit the floor nearby. A body or a piece of equipment, she couldn't tell. She pushed up onto her hands. Her palms were scraped. The room was clearing. The white was resolving back into the cold blue of the emergency lighting, and she could see shapes becoming people, becoming individuals in the chaos of the room. Roman was still standing. That was the first thing she confirmed in the first second of returning vision. He was standing 6 feet from her, his hand on the shoulder of one of his men, his face cut along the cheekbone. The edge of something, shrapnel or a fall, bleeding in a thin line down the angle of his jaw. He looked at her before he looked at anything else. "You okay?" he said, raw and immediate, nothing operational in it. "Yes," she said. Maxime was gone. The chair was empty. The back wall had a door she hadn't noticed, partially concealed by the map tacked to it, a service exit, old and poorly documented in the floor plan Roman's people had used. 2 of Roman's men were already moving through it. She could hear them on the stairs below, the thud of boots, radio chatter coming back fast and broken. "South dock," someone said on the radio. "He's moving for the dock." Roman was already at the door. "Roman," she said. He turned. She crossed the room in 4 steps and put her hand on his arm. Not the injured side, the other one. And she felt him go very still under her hand the way he went still when something landed that he hadn't calculated for. "Don't get killed," she said. He looked at her hand on his arm, looked at her face. "I mean it," she said. Something moved in his expression, deep and unguarded and completely ungovernable. "Stay in this room," he said. "I'm staying in this room." He went through the door. She stood in the center of the room with the blood from her scraped palms and the residual ring of the flashbang in her ears and the empty chair where Maxim Dragunov had been sitting, and she breathed, in for 4, out for 4, and listened to the radio traffic from the dock below. The voices of men she had learned to distinguish running toward the sound of water and darkness. And a 62-year-old man who had spent 2 years building toward this moment and had not yet accepted that it was over. Below, on the dock, something hit the water. The radio went sharp and then silent for 3 seconds that were the longest 3 seconds she had experienced since standing in her mother's living room. Then Roman's voice, flat and absolute, "He's down. Dock is secure." She sat down on the floor of the empty room. Her hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against her thighs and breathed and let them shake because there was no one here to see it, and she had earned it, and the shaking was simply adrenaline completing its circuit without the pretense of composure. Garrett appeared in the doorway, took in the room, took in her. "It's done," he said. "I know," she said. "Roman's coming up." "I know," she said. She stayed on the floor. The room around her smelled of salt water and cold concrete and the acrid residue of the flashbang, and somewhere in the building below her a door was open to the dock, and she could hear the water now, the actual physical water of the harbor lapping against the pylons, indifferent and continuous. The chair in the center of the room was still overturned from the detonation. She looked at it. She thought about Maxim's voice saying she's the spine, and the way he had said it with something that was almost admiration for the chess move he hadn't seen coming. And she thought about Roman's face when he turned at the door, and the way he had gone still under her hand. And she thought about the fact that she had put her hand on his arm. Not because the script required it, and not because some calculus of strategy demanded it, but because the alternative, watching him walk out of the room and not saying it, had been genuinely, specifically unbearable in a way that she did not yet have the architecture to examine. She would examine it later. She would examine all of it later. The anger and the debt, and the 2 years and the mechanism, and the fact that he had told her the truth, and the weight of his expression when he said, "I'm sorry," in the stripped-down voice of a man who has run out of management. Later. Right now there was the sound of boots on the stairs, and she put both palms flat on the cold floor, and she pushed herself upright, and she was standing when the door opened. Roman came through the door with blood on his jaw and the particular exhaustion of a man who has been running on controlled fury for 6 hours and has just spent the last of it. He stopped when he saw her standing. She had expected him to look like Victory. She had seen men look like Victory before. At the diner occasionally, when something had gone their way and they wanted it witnessed. Roman did not look like victory. He looked wrung out and precise, the same way a good knife looks after it has been used for something it was designed for. Functional. Spent. Present. He crossed the room to her in 4 steps and stopped with 18 inches between them and looked at her hands. "You're bleeding," he said. "Scraped them when I went down." She turned her palms up. The concrete had taken the first layer off both heels. Nothing serious, already dried to a thin, dark line. "It's fine." He reached into his jacket and produced a folded cloth, the kind of thing a man like him apparently carried without making a production of it, and took her left hand in both of his and pressed the cloth against the heel of her palm with a careful, deliberate pressure that had nothing operational about it. It was simply careful, simply present. She let him do it. "Maxime," she said. "Alive," Roman said. He was looking at her hand. "He's in custody. My people have him in a vehicle." A pause. "He'll be transferred tonight. There are people who have been waiting a long time to have a conversation with him." "What does that mean?" "It means he won't be a factor in this city again." He switched to her right hand, the same careful pressure. "It means the network he's been rebuilding is already being dismantled. His people in the building gave up the structure within 20 minutes of the dock." He paused again. "He built a system on fear. Those systems collapse fast when the center goes." She watched him work on her hands, watched the focus he brought to the minor task of cleaning a minor wound on a woman whose minor wounds were not the most pressing operational concern of his evening. "Rowan," she said. "Is asleep in his apartment," Roman said. "Has been since 11. Our people will be on him until the end of the week as a precaution, then a reduced presence for 30 days. He finally looked up from her hands. "He's okay. He was never going to be touched." "You can't promise that retroactively," she said. "No," he agreed. "But it's still true." She looked at him, at the cut along his cheekbone. The blood dried now to a thin dark trail following the bone's angle down toward his jaw. Without thinking, she reached up and put 2 fingers alongside the cut, not touching it, just assessing the edges of it the way she had seen her mother assess her father's injuries when she was small. Clinical, not tender, the gesture of someone who needs to understand the damage before they can respond to it. Roman went absolutely still. "It needs cleaning," she said. "Probably." "You have a first aid kit somewhere in this building. Garrett will have one in the vehicle." "Then we should go." She dropped her hand. He caught it, not urgently, not with force, just a light enclosure of her fingers before they fell, a question without words. She looked at their hands. "I'm still angry," she said. "I know. That doesn't go away because tonight went the way it went." "I know that. And there are things we need to talk about that we haven't talked about yet. The full accounting. What you did and why, and what you thought gave you the right." "Yes," he said. "All of it." She didn't pull her hand away. "Okay," she said. They went down the stairs and through the cold corridor and out onto the Caldwell yard, where the pre-dawn air hit her face like a flat hand. Salt and cold, and the iron smell of the waterfront. The yard was organized into controlled activity. Roman's people moving with the efficient purposefulness of a team executing the post-action phase of something complex. Vehicles repositioning, equipment being cleared, radio chatter reduced now to the quieter frequency of wrap-up rather than engagement. Garrett met them at the yard's edge. He took one look at Roman's face and produced a kit without comment. Willow took it from him before Roman could and opened it and found the antiseptic and the gauze and a piece of medical tape, and she said, "Sit," and gestured at the hood of the nearest vehicle. And Roman Valenti, who had spent the night orchestrating the takedown of a man who had been trying to destroy him for 2 years, sat on the hood of a car at 5:40 in the morning and let her clean the cut on his face. She worked in silence. The antiseptic made him tighten slightly. She felt it in the small muscles around the cut. But he said nothing, held still, looked straight ahead at the middle distance with the composed patience of a man who has learned to endure pain without narrating it. She pressed the tape along the edge of the closed wound. "There," she said. He looked at her. The yard was busy around them and nobody was watching, or if they were watching, they were doing it peripherally, with the professional discretion of people who understood that the line between operational necessity and private moment was not theirs to cross. "I need to ask you something," she said. Ask. The 2 years. She held his gaze. Before Ferris, before the mechanism. What was it actually? Not the calculation. The thing underneath the calculation. Roman was quiet for a moment. Around them, the yard continued its organized activity, lights and vehicles and voices, and he sat on the hood of a car with medical tape on his face and looked at her in the pre-dawn dark. You worked double shifts, he said, 3-4 times a week. You walked home along Clement Street after midnight with your shoes in your hand because they hurt, and you stopped at the same corner and looked at the same lit window of the same apartment building for 30 seconds before you went in. He paused. I had business on that block. I saw you once, and I couldn't account for it. The way you looked at that window, like you were deciding every night to go back in. She said nothing. I started watching because I didn't understand it, he said. I understand most things that people do. I can account for. He stopped. You were tired all the time, and you never stopped. You never stopped taking care of people who needed you, and you never made a performance of it. You never needed credit for it. He looked at the middle distance. I'd been around people who did terrible things for good reasons and good things for terrible reasons my entire life. And I had developed a very particular kind of cynicism about human motivation. And then there was you, just you, being exactly what you were with no audience and no reward. She was looking at him with something she couldn't entirely name. Not softened, not resolved, but something that was moving slowly beneath the anger and the grief of what she'd lost when Vance told her the truth. You could have just talked to me, she said. That's the part I keep coming back to. You could have walked into the diner. Yes. Why didn't you? He looked at her directly. Because I was afraid you'd say no, he said. And if you said no, I'd have had to accept it. He stopped. Something moved in his jaw. I didn't want to accept it. So you built a box instead. Yes, that's not love, she said. What you felt may have been real. I believe that it was real, but the way you acted on it was control. You controlled the situation so the outcome was guaranteed, and that's... She pulled in a breath. That's the part that damaged something, not the feeling, the method. Yes, he said. I know that. Do you? She said. Because I need to know that you know it. Not that you're saying it, that you actually understand what you took from me. Roman looked at her with those pale, exhausted eyes. You had a choice, he said. You made it in your mother's living room, and you believed it was real, and it wasn't, because I had already arranged the walls. I took your choice. I took the real one, the one that was actually yours. He held her gaze. I know what that is. I know what it costs, and I know there isn't a sufficient apology for it. She stood in the Caldwell yard in the cold pre-dawn with the waterfront sounds around her, and looked at the man she had been married to for 3 weeks, who had built a container around her life, and filled it with more decency than she had expected and more damage than she had known. And she was angry, and she was tired, and she was something else she didn't have a clean name for yet. I need time, she said. You have it. Not a little. Real time. Time to figure out what I actually feel separate from everything that's been done to me in the last month. Yes, he said. And while I'm figuring it out, she said, you tell me the truth. Everything. No more operational withholding. No more information gaps because you're waiting for confirmation or context or the right moment. Everything. Yes. And you don't... She stopped, started again. You don't make decisions about my life without me. Not anymore. Whatever comes next, we decide it together or it doesn't happen. He looked at her for a long moment. Something in his expression had a quality she had not seen on it before. Not the stripped rawness of the confessional night, not the controlled fury of the operational hours. Something quieter. Something that looked, in its unfamiliar form, like a man setting down something he had been carrying alone for a very long time. Yes, he said. She nodded. Okay, she said. Then let's go home. The drive back was quiet. She sat in the rear of the vehicle with her cleaned hands in her lap and watched the city slide past the windows as the dark thinned toward early morning gray, the streets beginning to populate with the first edges of the day. Delivery trucks, a woman walking a dog, the lights of a bakery already on behind its glass, The ordinary machinery of the city resuming its cycle without any knowledge of what had occurred at the Caldwell waterfront in the hours before dawn. She thought about Rowan asleep in his apartment. She thought about her mother's crossword puzzle and morning tea. She thought about the corner on Clement Street and the lit window she had looked at every night for years before going in. The window of her own apartment. She realized now that she was on the outside of it, that the look had not been hesitation or weariness, but something more specific. The daily decision of it. The nightly recommitment to the ordinary life she had been holding together with the particular, unglamorous tenacity of someone who had decided, at some point without ceremony, that holding it together was worth it. She had made the same decision in a Caldwell yard at 5:40 in the morning, just with different walls. They reached the estate at 6:20. The gate opened. The gravel drive crunched under the vehicle's tires. The maple trees along the drive were beginning, in the gray light of the early morning, to show the first real green of the advancing season. Not the tentative suggestions she had noticed 2 weeks ago, but actual leaves, small and deliberate, the tree's annual refusal to remain bare. She looked at them as they passed. Inside, Celeste was already present. She took one look at Roman's taped cheekbone and Willow's scraped hands and the general quality of the morning on both of them, and she said nothing except breakfast in 30 minutes, and disappeared toward the kitchen with the composure of a woman who has served a complicated household long enough to have developed a complete absence of surprise. Willow went upstairs. She stood in her bathroom and ran the shower hot and stood under it for 10 minutes with her palms flat against the tile and let the heat work on the places where the cold had gotten in. The joints and the back of her neck and the place behind her sternum that had been clenched since Garrett said, "Here we go," in the dark interior of the vehicle outside the Caldwell yard. She dressed. She went downstairs. Roman was already at the kitchen table. He had cleaned up, changed his jacket. The medical tape on his cheek was slightly incongruous against the rest of his assembled appearance. A crack in the surface, small and visible, the evidence of a night that hadn't been without cost. Petra set coffee in front of both of them without ceremony. They ate breakfast in a silence that was not the charged silence of the early weeks, not the silence of two people performing composure at each other across a formal distance. It was the silence of two people who had said enough for now and needed the ordinary act of eating to reassert itself before anything else. After a while, Roman said, "I need to make calls this morning. The network dismantlement needs coordination. It'll take most of the day." "Okay," she said. "You should sleep." "I will." "Willow." He set his coffee down. "What you did last night, the call, the way you thought through the source, the transmission, the timing." He looked at her steadily. "That wasn't instinct. That was clarity under pressure. Real clarity." She looked at him. "I've been managing crises my whole life," she said. "I just didn't have a frame for this particular kind." "You do now," he said. She thought about that, about what it meant to have a frame for this particular kind, the midnight negotiations and the operational calculations and the waterfront buildings in the pre-dawn dark. She thought about whether that was something she wanted, whether the frame itself was something she chose. She thought about Rowan, about the life he was building, entirely unaware of the architecture that had been assembled around it. She thought about her mother's hands, which were no longer trembling. She thought about the debt that was gone, and the broker who would never make contact, and the scholarship that would continue uninterrupted. And she thought about what she had traded for those specific things. She had traded her choice, and then she had chosen anyway. "I want to see my mother," she said. Roman looked at her. "When?" "Today. This afternoon." She held his gaze. "I'll take Garrett. I'll stay aware of the environment, but I want to sit in her kitchen and drink her terrible tea and tell her—" She stopped. "Not the truth. Not all of it. She doesn't need to carry all of it, but I want to see her." "I'll arrange it," he said. "I can arrange it myself," she said. Not sharply, just factually. The distinction mattered. He looked at her for a moment. Then he nodded once. "Yes," he said. "You can." She called her mother at 8:30 from the sitting room, and Diane answered on the second ring, which meant she had been awake since early and had been hoping for the call. "Baby," Diane said. "Hi, Mom." A pause. Her mother reading her through the phone the way mothers learn to read their children across any medium. "Are you okay?" "I'm okay," Willow said. "Really okay or phone okay?" She almost laughed. "Both," she said. I'm going to come today, this afternoon. If that's... I'll make tea, Diane said. Your tea is terrible. I know you hate it. I make it anyway. Her mother's voice had something in it, relief, poorly concealed, and beneath the relief a complicated love, the kind that had made terrible decisions on her behalf and knew it and had to live in that knowledge every day. Come whenever you want. I'll be here. She put the phone down. She sat in the sitting room for a while with the morning light coming through the east window. She had moved back to the east-facing rooms 2 days after the rifle shots, a deliberate reclamation because she refused to organize her life around what someone was trying to frighten her away from. And she looked at the maple trees in the garden below. The green was real now, actual and persistent and seasonal, indifferent to everything that had happened inside the walls surrounding it. She went downstairs at noon and found Rowan sitting in the entrance hall. She stopped on the third stair from the bottom. He was wearing his campus jacket and carrying his backpack, and he was looking around the entrance hall of the estate with the expression of someone who has been trying to construct a mental image of a place from fragmentary phone conversations, and has discovered that the reality is larger and stranger than the image. He looked up and saw her. "Hey," he said. She came down the last 3 stairs. "Hey." She looked at him, at her father's jaw and her mother's stubbornness, and the 20-year-old face of someone who had never asked to be in the center of anything. "What are you doing here?" "Mom called me," he said. "Said she was going to see you this afternoon. I asked if I could come." He looked at her more carefully, the way younger siblings learn to look when they suspected information was being withheld. "You look tired." "I had a long night." "What kind of long night?" "Work," she said. He processed this with the same obedient redirection she had always been able to deploy, and she felt the familiar mixture of gratitude and sadness at how good he was at trusting her. "This place is..." He gestured vaguely at the entrance hall, the staircase, the general scale of everything. "Willow." "I know. This is where you live now." "Yes." "And and Roman is..." He stopped. "Is he good to you?" She looked at her brother, at the directness of the question, the simplicity of it. "Is he good to you? Not is he powerful, not is he impressive, not is he what everyone says he is. Is he good to you?" The question of someone who loved her and had no framework for anything else. She thought about medical tape on a cheekbone and careful pressure on a scraped palm, and the word yes delivered 9 times in a row in a stripped-down voice at 2 in the morning. "He's working on it," she said. "And so am I." Rowan nodded slowly. "Okay," he said. That's kind of what relationships are, right?" "Yes," she said. "That's what they are." She took him to the kitchen and Petra made coffee, and they sat at the counter and Rowan talked about the Brennan paper, and Maya and the professor with the aggressive curve, and she listened and asked the right questions, and when he laughed at his own joke about the professor, she laughed too, genuinely, the sound of it surprising her slightly with its ease. Diane arrived at 2. She came through the front door and stood in the entrance hall and looked at the ceiling and the staircase and the quality of the light, and then looked at her daughter with an expression that contained everything she had never said on the phone. "Mom," Willow said. Diane crossed the hall and put both arms around her daughter and held on, not briefly, not with the careful physical restraint of a woman who prided herself on composure. She held on the way people held on when they had almost lost something and needed the physical fact of its presence. Willow held on too. After a while, Diane stepped back and looked at her and said very quietly, "I'm sorry." "I know," Willow said. "I should have told you. When the debt started, I should have..." "Mom." She took her mother's hands. "It's done. The debt is gone. Completely. Nobody is going to contact you." She held Diane's gaze. "It's done." Diane looked at her for a long moment with those eyes that could read their daughter through phone calls and crowded rooms and 30 years of proximity. "What did it cost you?" she said. Willow thought about the true answer, the complexity of it, the mechanism and the choice and the anger and the man with medical tape on his cheekbone who said, "Yes, I know," and meant it. She thought about the full weight of the accounting and whether her mother needed to carry any of it. "Less than I thought," she said, "and more than it should have, but I made it mine eventually." She squeezed Diane's hands. That's enough for now. Diane looked at her for another moment. Then she nodded with the particular acceptance of a mother who understands that her child has become something she can no longer fully follow and has to trust that the navigation is in capable hands. "Show me the garden," Diane said. They walked in the garden in the March afternoon, the three of them, Willow and Diane and Rowan, who kept stopping to take photographs of the stone walls and the maple trees with his phone and making architectural commentary that was neither accurate nor relevant. The cold had not fully lifted, but it had gentled, the edge taken off by the thin warmth of the advancing season, and the garden smelled of damp earth and the first suggestion of something green and alive making its case. Roman appeared at this garden door at 3:30. He stood in the doorway for a moment, assessing the scene with those pale eyes. Diane on the stone bench, Rowan examining the wall with the focused curiosity of someone who has never considered stone construction before. Willow standing at the center of it, watching her family exist in the space she had walked into a month ago as its only captive occupant. He met her eyes. She looked at him across the garden. Then she looked at Rowan and said, "Come here. I want you to meet someone." Rowan came over with the slight awkwardness of a 20-year-old meeting someone about whom he has no adequate framework. Roman extended his hand and Rowan shook it, and there was a moment, brief and dense with everything neither of them could say, in which Roman looked at the young man who had unknowingly been the instrument of his enemy and the center of his wife's most fundamental loyalty, and said, simply and without performance, "Your sister talks about you." Rowan looked surprised. "Good things?" "Almost exclusively," Roman said. "The professor with the curve sounds like a problem." Rowan blinked, then laughed, the quick, genuine laugh that was entirely their father. "She told you about that?" "She tells me things," Roman said. His voice was easy, careful in a way that looked effortless. "She's good at it." Willow watched Roman navigate her brother with a competence she had not predicted and could not explain and chose, for now, simply to observe. He was not performing warmth. He was applying attention, and 20 years of Rowan's life had taught her that her brother could not be performed at, that he read inauthenticity the way their mother read it, instinctively and without mercy. He was not reading inauthenticity. Diane watched from the bench without expression, which was Diane's expression for everything that mattered. At 4:30, Willow walked her family to the car Garrett had arranged. Rowan hugged her at the door with the full-body sincerity of someone who had missed her without quite being able to articulate why. Diane held her hands for a moment at the car door and looked at her face with the searching specificity of a woman looking for what she couldn't ask. "Call me," Diane said. "I will. Not phone okay? Actually, okay?" "I know the difference, Mom." Diane looked at her one more moment. Then she got in the car. Rowan waved from the window as they drove away. The gate closed behind them. Willow stood in the driveway until the gate was fully shut. The grounds were quiet in the late afternoon. The security rotation had resumed its ordinary patterns. Visible, but unhurried, the particular tempo of a household that had returned from a state of emergency to a state of alert. Not peace, exactly. But not war. She walked back through the front door. Roman was in the entrance hall. He had been waiting, not anxiously, not performing patience, but simply present in the way he was present in spaces, inhabiting them with a completeness that she had gradually stopped finding unsettling and started finding, in some inarticulate way, reliable. She stopped a few feet from him. "My mother thinks you're manageable," she said. Something moved in his expression. High praise. For her, yes. And Rowan, he liked you. She paused. He's a good judge. Don't use it against yourself. Roman looked at her. I wouldn't know how to use your brother's good opinion against myself, he said. It's not that kind of resource. No, she said. It's not. They stood in the entrance hall in the late afternoon light, and the house was quiet around them, in the specific way it was quiet when the operational urgency had resolved, and what remained was the ordinary business of two people in a space they shared. And she looked at him, at the taped cheekbone and the pale gray eyes, and the stillness that she had initially read as cold, and had gradually come to understand as the quality of a man who had been alone inside the management of everything for so long that stillness was simply what the long practice of it looked like. I need to say something, she said. Say it. I'm not where I need to be with you yet, she said, with what you did. I need you to understand that's true, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise. I understand. But I'm also... She stopped. Let herself hold the thing she was trying to say without softening it or complicating it beyond what it actually was. I'm also here. I'm not... Leaving is not what I'm oriented toward. I want you to know that too. Roman was very still. I'm here, she said. We're going to do the full accounting when I'm ready for it, all of it. And then we're going to figure out what we actually are, without the mechanism, without the architecture you built, just what it actually is between two people who chose each other. She held his gaze. Which means you're going to have to let me choose, really choose, without walls. Yes, he said, even if I choose wrong. You won't. Roman, you won't, he said again, not as control, as something he believed with a specificity that had nothing managing about it. But yes, even if. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she walked past him toward the kitchen because she wanted coffee and the afternoon light was good in the kitchen and Petra had gone home and she could make it herself, and she said, over her shoulder, there's enough for two. She heard him follow. In the kitchen, she filled the carafe and measured the coffee, and the afternoon light came through the west-facing window in long, flat lines across the counter and the floor, and she could hear the garden through the glass, wind in the maple trees, the particular sound of March turning into something less brutal. Roman sat at the counter without being asked. She poured the water and set the machine running and leaned against the counter across from him with her arms crossed, not defensively, just the posture of someone who had earned the right to stand in a room without offering anything unnecessary. The Clement Street Diner, she said. He looked at her. When we're further along, when I'm ready. She held his gaze. I want to go back, just once. I want to sit in a booth and drink the terrible coffee and... She stopped. I just want to go back. Something moved across Roman Valenti's face. Something that had no name she could apply to it from any category she'd had before this month. It was too unguarded for gratitude and too specific for relief and too permanent to be a passing thing. Okay, he said. Okay, she said. The coffee maker finished its cycle. The kitchen smelled of it, and the garden smelled of the turning season through the glass. And outside the maple trees held their new green against the dying afternoon with the particular stubbornness of living things that had been bare long enough to know the value of it. She poured 2 cups. She set one in front of him. She kept one for herself. They sat in the kitchen as the light changed and the day finished itself, and the city beyond the estate walls moved through its evening cycle, entirely unaware, as cities always were, of the specific and complicated and irreversible thing that had been survived inside these walls. By people who had not been soft. By people who had been broken open by circumstances neither of them had chosen cleanly and had reached, through the breaking, something more honest than what existed before it. She drank her coffee. He drank his. The waitress who had walked into a room full of strangers one rainy midnight and traded her freedom for her family had not ended up free in the way she had imagined freedom before that night. She had ended up in something more difficult and more specific and more genuinely hers, a life that she had not chosen from the outside but had chosen, piece by piece, from the inside, in waterfront yards and cold corridors and breakfast tables and garden paths, choosing it with open eyes and the full knowledge of its costs. Nobody had told her she would want it. She hadn't known herself. But here it was. The coffee was good. Outside, the city held its light against the dark for as long as it could, and the maple trees were green, and Rowan was already texting her a photo of himself and Maya at dinner with the caption, "Finally left the estate alive," and her mother was home making terrible tea, and across the counter, Roman Valenti was watching her read the text with an expression that was not managed and not contained, and not the face of a man who had ever needed to earn the right to feel what he felt. She showed him the text. He read it. Something crossed his face that she thought might have been, in its unfamiliar and unguarded form, the shape of a man who had spent 2 years watching someone from a distance and had arrived, finally and at significant cost, at the same table. She put her phone down. "Don't make it weird," she said. "I wasn't going to," he said. "You were about to say something." "I was going to say that he has good instincts." He looked at the phone. The caption. She looked at it again. "Finally left the estate alive." She laughed. The real kind. the kind that came from somewhere she hadn't expected it. Roman looked at her laughing in his kitchen in the last of the afternoon light, and whatever it was that had lived in him for 2 years, that particular, unglamorous, unasked-for thing that had made him build walls instead of knocking on doors, was present in his face without any of the management she had come to expect from him, and she saw it clearly. And she looked away before it could become something she had to respond to before she was ready. But she saw it. She finished her coffee. She rinsed the cup and set it on the rack and said, "I'm going to read for a while," and walked to the kitchen doorway, and at the doorway she stopped. She did not say anything. She put her hand on the door frame, briefly, the light touch of someone acknowledging a threshold, and then she walked through it. Behind her, the kitchen was warm and the light was going, and Roman Valenti sat at the counter with his coffee and did not follow, because she had said she needed time and he had said yes, and some promises were kept not in the grand gestures but in the daily, unheroic practice of actually meaning what you said. She went to the library. She chose a book. She sat in the chair by the window, the chair she had moved back to its original position 3 days ago, deliberately, facing the east garden and the maple trees and the stone wall and the world beyond it. And she opened the book and read until the light was gone, and then she sat in the dark for a while, and the house breathed around her, ordinary and large and hers in whatever complicated and honest way things became yours when you had fought for them from the inside. Outside, the first stars were making their case against the city's light. She sat with that. She had been a woman who counted minutes to survive them. She was learning, slowly and without ceremony, to let them run.